enough.
My
Hi, everybody.
We live now.
We're live now. Okay, behave yourself.
Yes, I'm good.
as you can see, I'm here with my friend Jessie Gender, and thanks everybody for being here. Oh, they're giving me the TikTok shives in the live chat because apparently it's been like a minute past the hour when I hit the go live button.
I'm disappointed in you, honestly, too.
So they give me it's my friend Dana, who I co-host my regular live stream on Wednesday with, started the TikTok shives shit. It haunts me.
That.
It haunts me every. When it's like it's 30 seconds over the hour. Come on, what are we doing
Moving
here?
along. Let's go. Come on, this is not Starfleet time. Come on.
What was the lower decks thing?
Buffer time.
Buffer time. Yeah, buffer time. Yeah, there's no buffer time when it comes to live stream start.
Well, you hate everything lower decks, obviously. So of course
I
you
do.
Can't do buffer time. Yeah, no, as we know.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of principle, I will not do anything derived from lower decks, just on principle. So yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. So we're gonna probably spend most of the time talking about this most recent season of Star Trek Discovery and Discovery as a whole, and sort of where we end up with it and what it means to the franchise, etc. And if anybody watching with us has questions, you can feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can argue with you, or agree with you, or whatever. But
I'll argue even if I agree. It's fine. It's perfect.
Yeah, you'll play devil's advocate. If I could play devil's advocate for a moment.
I mean, I'm a trans person in Pride Month. I have to play devil's advocate. That's just how it goes,
It's just the way it goes. It's not up to me. It's the rules.
That's I'll take my trans card if I don't. It's fine.
You weren't nearly as argumentative as we were hoping in that last live stream. This is a warning.
We'll take away one gender for that. One gender.
One gender. Don't force us to take away any more. It's about maintaining discipline. So anyway, but before we get too deep into the Star Trek talk, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this thing you did where what was it? You made a movie.
Yeah, I made a
How
whole
cool is that?
Thing. Yeah.
And
really cool.
So, and I'm sure most people who are watching this know about it already, but just in case they don't, so it's called Identities with a Z. Yes. And if you're watching this and you haven't seen the trailer for it or whatever, there's a link to the Nebula page for Identities in the description of this live stream that you're watching right now. Nebula.tv/identities. And you can check out the trailer, and you can sign up for Nebula if you're not already a member, so you can watch the movie when it comes out. But how'd all the movie making thing happen, Jessie?
Oh, it was just how the movie. It came out. It just appeared, and movie happened. I didn't really do anything. It's fine.
There was no work involved. It just sort of materialized.
Yeah. No, it was really cool. So the short version, just to tell the short version of the story, is I had this idea for the film a long time ago. The original piece was like a boy and girl version end up in a room together, myself, and they like had an argument, and it was very like up my own ass metaphor, like me dealing with my trans shit. Sure. Sort of thing. And so I shelved it for a long time, and then I met at Star Trek Mission Chicago, the convention, like 2 or 3 years ago. Dr. Aaron McDonald, who's the science advisor for the Star Trek franchise, and one of the coolest, nerdiest people you will ever meet in your life. And she loves producing films, and also she writes stuff as well. She wants to be, more heading in the TV writing direction. And we just like hit it off. And she was working on her own film then, Every Morning, which was done with Mary Chieffo, which is a fun like time loop lesbian film. And we both like really found that we loved like telling queer stories centered on other people that are like very sci-fi because we're both nerds. And so we said, hey, we should do the thing together. And then we were going to do a Kickstarter for it. And I kind of went back to this script that I had and kind of combined it with being more mature and having better understanding stuff. And I don't want to spoil too much, but like looking at like sort of corporatization of identities, like that's kind of the main idea of the film, is that how our identities today are kind of sold to us, where it's
Yeah.
like there's boy versions of you, girl versions of you. I mean, like a lot of the reasons that we think like gamer is a boy thing is because Nintendo they had to sell it in the boys side or the girl side of Target aisles essentially, and they picked the boy
Yeah.
side, and that's why we think of gamers as a boy thing. And so just thinking about like a corporatization of identity, how that feels about as a like a trans person or a queer person who is like, I don't want to be what's sold to me. I want to be my own person, and sort of exploring it from there. So that's the main thrust of it without spoiling too much of the plot. And so we said we're going to do a Kickstarter, but then Nebula kind of heard about it. Right. The funny story on it is I actually went on to Nebula's Slack and was like, oh, hey, I'm doing a Kickstarter in the next few days. If anyone wants to like, just help out, it would mean a lot to me or whatever. And then
Right.
Dave, who's the CEO of Nebula, just like came into my DMs and says, well, what if we just fund it? I'm like, I mean, sure.
Or that. You could do that.
That'll be great. I won't say no to that. So yeah, Nebula was amazing and helped fund it, gave us a bunch of resources, and then Dr. Erin and I, she produced it and we made it, and we aimed to have as many queer folks, women, and people of color on the film as possible. In fact, we actually this is something that Dr. Erin really fought for, and I was right alongside her with, and we were both very proud as we won the parody. Well, not the one, but it's like I think like a. It's like like not a something you win. It's sort of like a like affiliation or whatever. We got this thing called Women in Parody, or Parody in Action, a badge or whatever for the film, which is saying that most of our film is women and non-binary people, and that doesn't even count queer folks or the trans men that we also have on the film as well. It's supposed to be at least 50% women or non-binary folks, and so that's something we're really proud of. And then the film itself, like I'm really proud of the story and what everyone worked on it for, and we got just to name drop people, John Delancey is in it.
Yeah.
He was sorry, I could tell so many stories, but like just John Delancey, he was the most intense man, but in like the nicest way, because he was like it's a short film essentially, like it's 45-minute piece, but he could just show up and be like, hey, all right, I'm here, I'm doing it, whatever, it's fine. Came in, like we talked even before the film, and he was like, I want to know about my character, like let's talk about it, let's chat. We talked a whole bunch about like influences for his character. Then on the day, like we were going through the script, he was like really intensely in on it, and it was intimidating, but not in like a scary way, in a he really cares and wants to get this right way. Got everyone's pronouns right, like because I was like, he's an older guy, maybe it's like I don't think he's a bigot or anything, but we'll allow him some, like he maybe got everyone's pronouns right, even like non-binary folks' pronouns. And was just like, he like when we did like voiceover afterwards, he's just like, yeah, I'll show. I was like, hey, I know like this is an inconvenience, we need to do a little bit of voiceover, but if you can't do it, like I understand, you're a busy guy. He's like, no, I'll be there when you need me. I'll be there today. So like just super nice. And yeah, you got him. Abigail Thorne of Philosophy Tube is in it.
Yeah.
Now of Star Wars and House of the Dragon fame.
Indeed. Yeah.
So,
Maggie Fish, right?
Maggie Mae Fish, who is also
Yeah.
wonderful. She's one of the leads, alongside James Tyson, Ezra Reeves, and Jackie Cox, who's also a Star Trek person, drag queen, famously. So yeah, I'm ranting at this point, so I'll
Well,
end up
no,
short,
it's
but
really,
just
I mean, if anybody hasn't seen the trailer for it yet, it's just like a 30-second teaser trailer, and it's really, it sort of sets up the premise in, without giving anything away, and shows off some of the cast, and it looks like a really cool, sci-fi short film, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, and two things to say about it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Just to jump off the trailer thing, because I've been excited about two things I'll share here. This will be an exclusive. We're doing tomorrow. We're releasing another trailer that'll be on my channel. It's just a slightly longer version of the one that went out. But in it, if people pay attention, there'll be a little glitch. There was some weird thing in there that may go to a website that if you look into it, maybe there's some interesting little things to find and look around for. And I may have been very excited and wrote a whole lot of stuff for, because I grew up watching Lost and I love ARG.
Yeah,
so.
Some viral marketing. Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's
that'll
so
be out
cool.
tomorrow. So
that's so good. And the movie is on Nebula June 25th.
Yep, it'll be out June 25th, which is a Tuesday. And then yeah, just to hawk my wares, and we can actually talk about Star Trek. The thing I will say about it is the hope for this, because we've been billing it as a short film, but it is a 45-minute piece, and the hope actually is there is an after credit scene, and that the hope is that this will be a pilot or a proof of concept for a show that we want to continue on with Nebula, and make more episodes of. So it does tell its own whole story, but there is definitely like stuff to tell afterwards. And yeah, just to do the like Hawkwares thing, if you do sign up for Nebula using the link, that helps show them that they're people who want to watch Identities. So that's the way to support it. So
Yeah, watch the movie, sign up for Nebula through the Identities link, and if enough people do that,
you might get more.
Nebula will say, well, maybe we should give Jessie more money to do more things.
Give me more money to make more things, and I'll spend it. I swear I won't spend it on a beer and hookers. It'll be fine.
You know, when you were talking about how, you know, you just sort of, you know, popped into the Nebula Discord just to intending to promote the crowdfunding, and then they said, well, why don't we fund it? Like, it reminded me, it's sort of like the inverse of what happened with the first season of when they came back and did more Mystery Science Theater about 5 or 6 years ago, and that season wound up going on Netflix, and it was like, you know, they had this big, you know, really at the time really super successful crowdfunding campaign where they funded enough, they exceeded all of their goals and raised all this money, and everybody was like super excited to do more Mystery Science Theater. And then after they had raised all the money, Netflix came in and said, Netflix came in and said, hey, you want to show it on Netflix? You can put it on Netflix. And I'm sure, like, you know, Joel was like, yeah, great, you couldn't have shown up with some money about a year ago, like, once we can pay for it all ourselves, now you're coming in and going, you want to put it on Netflix?
Yeah, just put it here. It's like, I got a nice spot on the shelf for it. It's like, come on, you can work for it.
Yeah, like, yeah, please, my ready-made project that you don't have to spend a dime on. Sure, you can have it.
Yeah. It's always the fun element of that. Is just like, it's the thing I've learned throughout all of this, is just you do it for the passion of making the project, and like all the other stuff is like stuff you have to deal with, like the bureaucracy of it and things like that. And Nebula's been obviously better than a lot of studios have obviously would be in this case, but obviously, like, there's stuff you deal with to do the stuff you love, and like what I know that I love doing this is that, you know, all the stuff that was frustrating or all of the rest was like, it was all worth it because I loved making this thing, and I'm really proud of it. So, and I'm proud, even more especially, like, proud of everyone who worked on it. Like, that's one thing that I always have been trying to tell people, like, for me, it's this is just such a big learning experience for me. Is like, we tend to put like, oh, auteur director, this person's making it, and you know cognitively, like, there's a bunch of people that like make this thing and work on it together, but it was such a cool thing to experience and be like, oh, at a certain point in the process, your job just becomes to just go around to everybody who is amazing artists and be like, help guide them, like, be like, oh, this is going to work with this thing. But like, they're doing, like, you just trust that they're cool artists who understand it, and you just facilitate them being amazing. And that's just like, that was like the coolest part of being a director, honestly.
Yeah. Just making sure that nobody's doing anything that's like way, way, way far
afield. Like, what's going on here? Yeah. Like, but it was just like, I get to just be like, hey, here's a bunch of cool artists. Let's all make, like, let me facilitate y'all making a cool thing. Like, that's really becomes my job at a certain point, and it's like a lot of fun. So
I'm so happy that you got to do it, and I hope that you get to do many, many more. It's really cool. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I made a cool thing, so that's what I'm
yeah, exactly. Like, even if for some reason you only get to do this one, you did this one. You know, like, hopefully you get to do a lot more, but if not, you did this one, and that's awesome.
No one can take. I got to work with John Delancey and a bunch of, like, it's like no one can take it away from me, so
exactly, because you didn't do it for Warner Brothers, so they're not just they're not gonna just delete it. They're not just gonna write it off for taxes and delete it forever and say, hey, thanks for all your hard work. No one's ever gonna see it.
Yeah.
So, and that's anyway,
sorry. Oh, that's the thing about. Sorry, I'm hawking Nebula too much.
No, please go ahead.
The nice thing about them is that technically under the contract, like, I still own it. Like, I own.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Which is really, So it's,
like,
it's nice
you retain ownership of it. Yeah. That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah. So, there was this show called Star Trek Discovery
Yep.
that
There
I
was.
think, judging by our wardrobes, I feel like we've both heard of this show.
I'm just like disco. I don't know what you're talking
I like
about.
just just a big Bee Gees fan. I don't know what you're talking about. I like Donna
Yeah.
Summer. Yeah, no. So actually I I was talking about this on another live stream. Actually I was talking about it I think Wednesday of last week to either Wednesday or Friday, because I think I had a Friday live stream last week too. And I was talking about doing this with you,
Mhm.
and I said we're gonna talk about Star Trek Discovery, and I said Star Trek Discovery, it was the first of the current generation of Star Trek shows, and it's also the first to have finished its run. And someone in the chat said, "No, Picard finished its run first," and I was like, "Oh!"
Yep.
I was living in this beautiful bubble of
Picard.
forgetfulness where I was like, Picard, oh, that show, right? Um, but but yeah, Discovery wrapped up its run. It had for I would say for the streaming era, a 5 season run is pretty good.
Yeah.
A
Very
lot of
good.
shows are lucky to get 1 or 2,
Hmm.
and Disco got 5. And didn't get to go out completely on its own terms, because I think most of the season was finished when word came down that this was it. But they did
Yeah.
at least get the chance to go back and kind of tweak the final episode to make it feel more like a series finale.
Yeah.
So I watched your review of the last episode,
Hmm.
and as I suspected, we disagree on some of the details,
Hmm.
but overall, if you average our feelings about it, we mostly kind of feel the same way about it. It seems like,
Yeah, I watched your
you
review
know,
too.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I again, it's like there's some things here. I'm like, oh, I can't even remember off the top of my head, but like there was some things like, oh, I disagree with that, disagree with this, but like overall, I think we have very similar sentiments where
yeah,
it was like, it was fine. I mean, I don't want to take words like fine,
yeah,
didn't knock it out of
yeah.
the park, but obviously wasn't like a dumpster fire. It wasn't season 2 of Picard.
No, it wasn't. I mean, and in certain ways, like I know in my review, I mean, my overall opinion of the entire season wasn't as positive as I have felt about past seasons.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say, I mean, and it's not, I don't necessarily mean it as a compliment, but I mean, this season was more consistent
Yeah, yeah,
than past seasons have been.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
I agree. Yeah.
there
So
were fewer ups and downs in terms of, the narrative and relative quality of things.
yeah, it was like there was no, I guess to use a baseball metaphor, it's like there was no whiffs really. Like, nothing ever felt like it was completely like a, oh man, that episode was terrible. But there was nothing that ever felt like a home run either. It just was
Good
like, yeah,
point.
this is amazing. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, everyone hit the ball, everyone got to base, and everyone got home. We scored the points, but like I don't know why I'm using the baseball metaphor. I'm gonna stop it because I'm not a
You,
sports person.
you're doing good. You're doing
Yeah,
good. As a basebal fan, you haven't said
yeah.
anything completely like, "Oh, she's never seen baseball before."
Yeah.
Well,
They caught the puck and threw it out.
they,
It was good.
you lost it.
I tried.
But yeah, that was one of the things I noticed, and it didn't really hit me until I was sort of going back over the entire season when I sat down to write that video that I did,
Hmm.
where I thought, yeah, I mean, you can't pick out a single episode from season 5 that was like especially rotten, but at the
Hmm.
same time, there was none that was really great either.
Yeah.
In season 4, my opinion of season 4 was it had a really great first half, and then they took that mid-season break and came back like a month later, and for me anyway, most of it just completely fell apart. And I think they got it back together at the end. I thought the last episode of season 4 was pretty good, and they kind of
Hmm.
stuck the landing, but they kind of got lost in the wilderness on the way there. But the first part of season 4 had some of my favorite episodes of the entire show.
Yeah.
And season 5, there was nothing anywhere close to those
Heights.
heights, which
Yeah.
was disappointing considering that that's all we're going to get.
I know. Same here too. And it's something too that like this season had that I actually liked. And I know you. This is again maybe one of those things where we disagree slightly on
Hmm.
it. Where I kind of liked the framing of the season, where I've actually been recognizing in Doctor Who, and it's kind of made me look back at
Hmm.
this. I don't know if you watched the season of Doctor Who, but this Doctor Who also does sort of like the mystery box, like big season mystery thing. And I
Yeah.
actually really like how it's handled in Doctor Who, not even just the season, but even previous seasons of Doctor Who, like going back to this era of Doctor Who, like the modern era.
Yeah.
In that I actually don't, I found that I don't mind mystery boxes when they are not the main plot. When you have episodes where it's like, here's an
Yeah.
episode that is its own whole thing, tells its own whole story, and then maybe you have like a little Easter egg here that'll be like, oh, do you see that? That might be the thing.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't distract too much, but it's there. And then at the end, you sort of have these moments of like, oh, do you see all these little clues throughout the season? They all come together, and then the finale tells its own story that connects all those dots. But each episode on its own was its own thing. And my big problem, I think, that always I think hampered Discovery's pacing was they would do like at the beginning of the season where they would start like that, where it'd be like, here's a little hint, like, oh, we have the burn, that's a mystery that's going on,
Right.
or we have like this the Klingon war that's going on, with maybe some little hints of the mirror universe. Like they have little those sprinkles of Easter eggs, and then they still have like episodic, like here's a cool story of like,
Right.
here's this episode, focus on this. But then the back half of the season would get so bogged down by like, all right, now we need to really focus on the story. And it's like they're trying to, because they figured it out, because they always would like probably start writing the season before they figured out what the mystery at the end was, the little hints. And they're like,
Yeah.
all right, now we need to focus on it. And it would just grind the pacing to a halt. And then we get
Yeah.
to the end, and then they'd be like, all right, we can tie these all together at the end in a way that hopefully will be satisfying. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, depending on what season you're watching. And then this season, I think it was a better balance for me, like Doctor Who, where it was like, oh, we have a structure that like sprinkles in the Easter eggs of like, here's this the next, we got the next piece of the MacGuffin to get us to
Yeah.
the thing at the end. But like this episode itself is like its own whole episode, which I thought worked structurally better for them.
Yeah. I feel like one of the things I will say for season 5 that I don't think I talked very much about in my review video was, and this is something that I have complained a lot about with Discovery in the past, even for seasons that overall I thought were a lot better than this one, is
Mm-hmm.
the, and you mentioned it a second ago, just the uneven pacing,
Mm-hmm.
where it seems like they reach a point in the season where it's just like they keep wanting to focus on that main story, whatever it is. Like they want
Mm-hmm.
it to continue to be this very serialized story, but like it just becomes glacial, where it's just like, God, like nothing is happening, or like one thing happened, or like they go through this little mini adventure in the episode and they accomplish like one tiny little thing,
Yeah.
for the main
Oh.
story, and you're like, oh, what did this need to take an hour? Did we need an hour to get this much further?
Mm-hmm.
And at least in season 5, because that main story was so straightforward,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like it's a fetch quest and that's all it is.
Yeah. That's
It's
all we're
we're
doing here.
we're looking for these clues and that's it. We have 10 episodes to find these clues and then we're done, and that's all we're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, like the pacing wasn't as much of an issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
um it was just, it was a better paced, very underwhelming story. you
Yeah,
know
yeah, I agree. And yeah, I think like the underwhelming part for me, and this is something I'd spoken too much about, but I'm curious your thoughts on it, is like
Okay.
each episode had there were some episodes that had like really cool concepts. Like the library episode, like
I
this
love,
idea
yeah.
of this
Yeah.
library, and then even when Burnham goes into it, it's like, oh, it's this what's the story of the like the infinite library, where there's like one book that has like 10 words on like it's like every single book that could possibly exist is in this
Oh,
library.
yeah.
It was
Yeah.
Jorge Luis Borgia, I think is the author who came up with
Yeah.
that idea, something like that. But it had that like infinite library vibe to it, and I'm like, oh, this is some cool, like there's some cool visuals here, but it never feels like it took advantage of like exploring the full concept of it. Same thing with like the time loop episode. Like the time loop episode felt really fun, of like, oh, we're jumping through Disco's history, and like there's a bit of nostalgia in that, but I mean, even though it probably wasn't intentional at the time, The
For the
like
last season. Yeah.
season, it makes it kind of makes it work.
Yeah.
And then also like they go to the ISS Enterprise, like, oh, we're on the ISS Enterprise, you're gonna do anything with that? And it's just like there, and it's just like it's the Enterprise because of course it's the Enterprise for nostalgia. And it's just like these are cool concepts that I feel like you could do something with, but they never really take full advantage of it, was my kind of frustration at times.
Yeah, I agree. Because yeah, there were episodes that seemed like they could have been a lot stronger because they, and I mean this goes, there are disco episodes from throughout the run where I could say
Mm-hmm.
that, where it's like, man,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a good idea, but it's like they couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with it. And like the library episode, I agree, like they found a great setting to shoot it at, like that library looks
It
amazing.
was really cool,
and
yeah.
and it's just a cool idea that we've never really seen in Star Trek before. The idea of like, oh yeah, of course there's a cosmic library out there in the galaxy somewhere. And
Yeah.
like it's just a neat idea. And it's like, okay, it makes sense. They're on this quest to find clues to, and oh, hey, why not have a piece of the treasure map be hidden in the galactic library? Okay, like it makes sense. And I like the head librarian. I thought she was a
Yeah.
great
Oh, she was
character
wonderful.
and
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. And there were pieces of it that I really liked, and I liked the overall concept of it. And I liked, I mentioned in my video, I like the vision version of Book. I thought
Yeah.
I
It
thought
was
David
very,
Ajala
I
did a
loved his
really good
outfit.
job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, his outfit and just his whole bearing, his whole like, like willing to be helpful but not volunteering anything.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
she has to ask him. If she asks him, he'll help, but he's not going to volunteer anything. He's just kind of standing there going,
Sure. Yeah.
like, you want to ask for help? I can't tell you, but if you want to ask for help, I'm right here. you
Mm-hmm.
know I liked a lot of it, but then it's like it all boils down to, oh, the main character has to
Learn a
make
little bit about herself. Yeah.
yeah, it has to make like a vulnerable confession, and that's the real puzzle. And it's like, okay, I mean, is that really the best we could come up with? For I mean, I'm not saying it would have been better if she had to, like, if it had been a literal puzzle she had to solve, but there
Mm-hmm.
must be some kind of medium between those two
Well,
where it's like, okay, I'm telling you there's a test, but the test I'm letting you believe is the test is actually not the test at all.
yeah.
And all you need to do is admit that you have insecurities and fears and prove that you're worthy of this quest, and then you win. It's like, it feels, again, like after sitting through like an hour of an episode, it's like, oh, all she had to do was just tell the guy
Yeah.
that, admit that she's afraid and she doesn't think she's good enough, and he's like, you win.
Yeah. Yeah. Glad you had a therapy session. It's great. But yeah, exactly. It just feels like, oh man, we could explore this a little more and have it married with characters, because yeah, sometimes you don't want the concept to like override the character exploration either. You don't want it to be like so concept heavy that's like, all right, this is just too wild and I don't connect to it in any way through what these people are experiencing. But it just feels like there was never a good balance of it at
Yeah.
times, and that was just what was frustrating. It's like, oh, we'll do the time loop episode, but most of it will be spent in like a corridor that's flickering. It's like, oh, we're in the mirror universe era of the ship, but we're just hanging out in the flickery corridor right now. So like visually, it was like, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very allergic to Easter eggs and
Yeah.
fan service, and my antenna goes up really easily for that. So as soon as I saw the Enterprise, I was like, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
Like we can't, the God forbid this show stand on its own or be allowed to stand on its own. It's like,
Yeah.
no, hey, if you're getting bored with all this Discovery stuff, look, the Enterprise is right there.
Yeah.
The show has established its identity. We don't need to, we don't need to keep running back to, Enterprise. Like, I love the Enterprise too, guys. But
we don't need it all the day. Yeah. It's like
yeah.
everything has to end on it. Picard ends on the Enterprise, or I have Strange Worlds of the Enterprise, and it's my problem with it, with those things too, is like I don't necessarily mind nostalgia or Easter eggs when there is a justifiable use for it, of like, oh, we could only, like, we have a story that could only be done with the end, like the Enterprise being here,
Right.
or something like that. Like it justifies itself rather than like, you know, Picard season 3 where we have the Easter egg station. Be like, there's an Easter egg here. There's an Easter egg
Just
here.
like
It doesn't
just
matter.
random stuff from like from previous shows. Like I remember this, remember this, remember this.
Yeah, I hate,
like
or even like
you're here to get data. Just get data and let's go. Come on.
Same thing at the end with this season with like Kovic's like back walls. Like, oh look, I got Geordi's visor, which I
agree with you. That feels a little morbid. Like even though you know it's like, well, but it's just like a pair of glasses or something. But it feels like kind of weird. It's like, why do you have that?
Yeah, it's like so intrinsic. It's like, it just reminds me Geordi's dead. That's weird.
Yeah.
And the with the Enterprise, specifically the ISS Enterprise, is just like the story you told. It's like, it's a mirror universe ship that like escaped, like, and this was all like exposited backstory. Like we don't get to see any of this. Like none of this is like in the actual episode itself. It's just like characters say like, oh yeah, this is what happened to it. And it's like that didn't need to be the Enterprise. In fact, it would have made more sense to me to have it be just like, hey, it's another, maybe even if you wanted to reuse the Strange World sets, like have it be like the ISS Defiant or something like that. Like you just have it be a little more off the beaten path of like the nostalgia of the Enterprise. And it's just, and again, like tell me what's like show me what happened with this. Like if it's like, oh, this is a refugee ship, like maybe have a little bit more of that in the episode. Like I don't know exactly how you do it, and I don't want to, like, again, we're reviewing, we're not like saying we'll rewrite it, but it's just like it doesn't feel like it's there for a purpose other than look, we're on the Enterprise. So
I was thinking about this earlier because I'm writing a video for next week about Star Trek Beyond, and I rewatched it this morning, and I was watching it, and I thought when it's revealed that like the ship that Jayla has on the planet is like it's a ship it's meant to be from like the Star Trek Enterprise era, but it's the Franklin.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I've never had this thought before, but I was watching the movie this morning and I thought, thank God it wasn't the fucking Enterprise.
Yeah.
Yes, thank God it wasn't the NX-01 Captain Archer Enterprise. That would have been so much worse. Yeah. Because like, what a coincidence, right?
It's here. Look, there's Jonathan Archer's corpse rotting in the corner.
Yeah, it's like, and that's the thing is like, I mean, I think you mentioned this in reference to something else in your review, but like it's the kind of thing that just, it feels like it shrinks the world.
Yes.
It makes everything feel smaller. Like, oh, what are the odds that they would happen to find a starship from the Mirror Universe, and it just so happens it's one we've seen before, the Starship Enterprise. It's like, oh, come on, seriously? Yeah, you're right. It could have been any ship, and it probably, I personally would have liked it better if it had been the ISS, Yorktown or something. Yeah, something. Yeah, like just you can still use the sets. I'm fine using the sets. Just like don't tell me it's the Enterprise by, oh, how about that? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I always just hate that like shrinking of the world aspect, like small universe syndrome, I think it's called, is like it just feels like you could have expanded it. And actually going back to what you said about the Star Trek Beyond ones, like I actually really love the Star Trek Beyond. I have like one major critique of Star Trek Beyond in that like Kirk is a little bit too jaded at the beginning of that movie. Like I wish.
Yeah, but they do that so they do that so he can have his arc. But
there is an arc there. It's just one of those. It works for the movie in itself, but as a like, I like the Kelvin movies, and it feels like, oh, I never got to see them doing the 5-year mission, and now he's like, we're in it, and he's just jaded about it. It's like I would have liked,
he hates it already. He's like 3 years in, and he's like, I'm done.
It's like I would have liked this. This is my pitch on that. Is like Into Darkness. The problem with Into Darkness, I don't hate Into Darkness either. It's not the worst one ever. Problems is it also gets bogged down in way too much nostalgia. But it's like characters like begin and end in the same place that they did at the end of 2009. Like the ending of Into Darkness is the same basic thing as the end of 2009, where Kirk's on the bridge, he's captain again, they're going off the 5-year mission, and it's like, oh, I would have rather Into Darkness be like a weird like jaunt, or have Beyond be the middle movie and then have another one at the end where he does feel like this is the end of the mission. Anyways, going back to Beyond, I do really like the Franklin, especially for that reason, where it's like, as a as a Star Trek nerd and an Enterprise fan, I look at that, frankly, I'm like, oh, look, it's got the same aesthetic. It's an NX ship, so it's kind
Yeah.
of same things. Like my nerd nostalgia vibes are fed to a degree of like, oh, I'm in fact, to a degree, I can kind of be that smug nerd who like turns to my partner watching movies like, well, did you know the Enterprise and it was also an NX ship from the 22nd century?
Right.
So like it still feeds that same feeling, but it doesn't make the universe smaller and doesn't feel like so on the nose of like, oh, look, it's the Enterprise. So
And it doesn't feel like for those of us who have seen Enterprise, it doesn't feel like we're just seeing stuff we've seen before.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, and that's another one of my big problems with that kind of fan
Yeah.
service. It's like I've seen this.
Mhm.
Like show me, you know, I'm like you. Like if there's a reason for it that goes to the story or to the characters, you know, I'm not saying that the writer of a new show in a long running franchise should be expected to completely pretend that all the other stuff never happened. But if you're going to make like specific references to things from other shows, make me feel like it needs to be there for your show, not just because you want to remind me like, oh, TNG was a good show. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know, but we're not doing TNG.
And it
You know,
dilutes
like,
and it dilutes the power of it. Like there's something you
yeah.
said of like every once in a while of like when it's just every once in a while of like oh hey look here's a little nostalgia thing, or and especially when it's used like in Next Generation Relics where we get to see the original bridge and it's used for
Oh,
like
great. That's a
Scotty's
great use of it. That's a great
exactly.
use of it.
It doesn't dilute the original version of it and it feels like it's pertinent to what's happening in the story. So like those elements are great. But like jumping out of like as another example, my partner had never seen the Ghostbusters movies, and I learned
Okay.
this while we were watching the most recent Ghostbusters movie, Frozen Empire. We had a friend of hers over, and we were just chilling. We went to a music festival the day before, so we were tired. So we're like, oh, let's just toss this on. It'll be like it's not too taxing of a movie. We can just
Yeah.
chill. Um, and we learned in the middle of that she had never seen the original. It's like, oh, we got to watch that. But in the middle of that movie, this is not really a spoiler, but in the middle of Frozen Empire, they're in the library from the first one, and they're like,
Yeah.
they're like running away from something or other, and like Dan Aykroyd turns a corner and he sees the librarian from the first movie, and she does the same like jump scare from the first movie. And it's just like a really quick, cheap version of that original scene that,
Yeah.
like, when I was a kid, was like one of the scariest scenes. I was terrified of that when I was a kid. It was such a big. I have vivid memories of it, but it's just a diluted version of it. And
Yeah.
my partner had never seen it, so we like watched that movie. We watched Frozen Empire first, and we were like, oh, let's go back and watch the original one because you haven't seen it before. We watched it right afterwards, and like the original version of that scene, she was like, not like it didn't mean anything to her. I'm like, oh, this is my favorite, and she's just like, oh yeah, it was the thing that we saw in the other movie, and it just ruined it for her. And it's just this
Yeah.
cheap distillation of just this echo. It's just an echo of what we've seen before, and it just removes it from what makes it so meaningful of a moment just as we go further. So
Yeah. Like write a new joke.
yeah.
You know, that's that most of my like problems with that kind of writing can be solved with just that. Just write another joke.
Very something new. Very
Don't,
something new.
you know, do something else. But yeah, to take it back to Discovery, because up until we get to that Kovich scene at the end, I mean, there's the ISS Enterprise, which we've been talking about, and that's an example, but most of the season surprisingly is free of that kind of fan service because,
Yes,
you know,
yeah.
the premise is rooted in an old TNG episode. And that kind of got on my nerves, but ultimately that doesn't really come up that much. So most of the season doesn't feel super pandering and nostalgic and fan servicey, which I liked. I was like, oh, okay. I'm still not sure why they needed to make this a protracted sequel to The Chase, which isn't even that great of an episode, but whatever, you know, it's fine. But once they get away from that, it kind of becomes its own thing. And, you know, you don't really have that strong a sense of, you know, this is all about nostalgia bait. And then it's like they can't help themselves. It's like they get to that Kovich scene and it's like, look at the baseball.
Yeah.
Look at the bottle of wine.
And it's also like, and they're all just Easter eggs, and it makes no sense. Like, this is the other thing too that someone pointed out to me. Like, again, I'm a huge Star Trek Enterprise fan, so there's that. I was like, oh, he's Daniel. That's kind of cute.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing we disagree on about it.
Yeah,
but I understand why you feel the way you feel.
Again, it's like, but and this is just completely. There's a part of me that there's a part that tickles me that says, oh, famed director
David
David
Cronenberg.
Cronenberg is playing a character from Star Trek Enterprise of all
Yeah.
things. Like, there's just a part of that tickles me about that. But anyways, but like even in that, like the Easter eggs behind him are all like Next Generation and Deep Space Nine Easter eggs, and none of them
Yeah.
are from Enterprise, like the NXO Enterprise, where it's
Yeah.
like
The
where he
ship he was.
has
Yeah.
an emotional connection to that we have seen before.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. The ship that we've seen this character be on. Like if
doesn't,
he's
yeah,
supposed to be Daniels, well, as far
yeah,
as we've ever seen, Daniels has nothing to do with the TNG Enterprise or Deep Space
yeah.
Nine.
And he also even
Yeah.
says, like, I'm from, I think in the scenes, like the USS Enterprise and other places. And like, he's from the NX-01 Enterprise, not
Right.
USS Enterprise.
Which was,
so he doesn't even call
yeah.
out the
And see,
NX-01.
and this is one of the things that I get a little impatient with. There's a certain kind of fan that is like a little overeager to justify stuff like that. And like my problem with that whole Kovach's Daniels thing is, I mean, the fact that he says USS Enterprise,
It's
like,
whatever. Yeah,
it's
whatever.
like at the bottom of the list. Like, I really don't care. But, you know, if you point it out to someone and they'll say like, well, I mean, you know, it was established in such and such episode that eventually Archer's Enterprise was recommissioned USS Enterprise after the Federation was founded and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that wasn't in any of the shows we've ever seen. It means nothing. It's just, it was maybe like, it was like a throwaway line in an episode of Strange New Worlds or an episode of Picard or something. It's like, we didn't see that in the show. The stuff we actually see in the show is more important.
Yeah, exactly. Like connect, if you're gonna make that connection to it.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing too that I wanted to say? I forgot what it was gonna be, but yeah. So
yeah. But yeah.
I mean, to give a praise to the season, to like jump to something to praise, I actually really loved, I think my favorite episode of the season, and again, there was none that was knockouts for me, but the episode I really, really loved was Whistle Speak. I loved Whistle Speak.
Someone mentioned that in the chat, and actually, I think when I did my video, I said that my favorite was the time loop episode. But now that I think about it, and now that I've had a little time to sort of sit with it, I think Whistle Speak might be my favorite episode of the season too. Because it's mostly a standalone episode, and it has the story is pretty self-contained and has a couple of interesting twists, you know, where you can tell that they were, you know, they actually, the writing of it actually had some thought put into it. And it has like a Star Trek-esque message at the end when Burnham talks the father into, you know, opening the hatch so that his child can survive. And you know, and then he sort of has this crisis of faith, and she talks to him in a way that like doesn't rob him of his faith, even though like from her perspective, she kind of knows his faith is bullshit. Like she knows that these water towers were made by aliens, and this religion they've, you know, built around it is based on false premises, but she doesn't take that away from him. She just says, well, sometimes, you know, faith needs to evolve. And it's a lovely episode.
I agree. And like, it speaks to, I think an episode like that speaks to what I really love about Discovery. Because one of the, just to frame it this way, like one of the things that's often shoved at Discovery from the Outright Emergence or whatever, where it's like, oh, it's too emotional, the characters are crying too much, and I'm like, no, that I really think, like, sometimes it can be a bit much, and like there can be some melodramatic elements that it goes too far, but what I do really love about Discovery is it feels like the show that does seem to be more willing to explore emotions in a way that sometimes other Star Trek shows that feel a bit more reserved and sedate, whether it be from just the writing or just the fact that they're military, there's in like a pseudo military-esque structure. And I like that the show is willing to explore elements of like science and faith, or emotion versus rationality, because, you know, there's this very like, you know, judgmental view of like, oh, we always have to be, everything has to be rational. It's like, no, we're human beings. Emotions inform our perspective and who we are and how we connect to each other and how we relate to each other. I think Star Trek does that, or Discovery especially does that really, really well. And like elements of like Whistle Speak kind of talked that, where it's like, we're not going to rob him of his faith. because it is something that is emotionally motivates him and brings people together and unites him, and we're not going to belittle him and judge him. We're going to help uplift him and help like maybe direct that in a more positive way that doesn't oppress people or hurt people or things like that. And so I love that. And then the other thing I loved about Whistle Speak too is it really felt like, and again, this is not my perspective, or like my lived experience, I should say, but from just like looking at the episode, it really felt like they took pains to try to write in a way that felt more less judgmental of indigenous folks. Like a lot of times Star Trek shows up and be like, oh, this primitive culture that we're gonna try and protect, and like we can't influence them in any way, or like and instead, and like, oh look, like we could save them, but they're just gonna let this person die. How primitive. And in this episode instead, like you see Burnham. I love that scene where she just sort of like, look, they recognize these different genders and they have this different culture, and show like that culture is not this like straight line towards like, oh, we're all going to become a warp drive, like pseudo Western style civilization. They have their own views and beliefs that are different from ours, and that's cool too. And then also the medicine sequence where they're like, the person has like the dust in their lungs, and they're like, Tilly says like, oh, we could save her in a second with our medicine. And then they actually have their own way of healing her with their like vibration thing. And it's like saying like, just because they don't have what we perceive as like Western style like medicine, it's something that they are intelligently using and practical with their own form of medical needs. And it just felt like a cool way to write cultures from ours that sort of separates it from this like judgmental, like we're more progressed than your primitive society, which I thought was really nice.
Yeah, and an intelligent way to do it, because like, of course they would have a treatment for this thing that you would imagine happens to them a lot.
Like exactly. Yeah. Like there's a lot of dust on this planet.
Yeah, like their planet has apparently been like this for a while, and this what happens to that woman, like you would imagine it happens, every once in a while. Like they would have figured out something to do to treat it by now. They wouldn't just be standing around helpless going, well, there goes another one. Yeah. If only we had advanced technology, but sadly we don't. And no one here does either, when Burnham and Tilly kind of guiltily looking at each other. Yeah. I thought it was a really good episode. And another thing you mentioned, that there's that acknowledgement from Burnham when she's going through the sort of mission briefing that they recognize more than two genders, and then one of the characters is non-binary. One of the people from that planet, the one who is the child of who gets trapped in the thing with Tilly. They're non-binary, and it's very low key. It's not like it's not like they're holding out their hand for a cookie.
Like we did a non-binary. We
did another non-binary one. Give us a cookie. We have another one. And that's speaking of like Discovery, as a whole. That's another thing that Discovery did more. It seemed a lot more important to the creators of Discovery to have more than just token queer representation. Because they could have stopped with Stamets and Culber. They could have said, well, hey, first time ever in Star Trek, we have gay people as regular characters. We
did the thing.
We did the thing, but they didn't stop. They said, okay, well, what if we have a trans character? What if we have non-binary characters? What if and
a lesbian, Jet Reno being a lesbian.
Reno being a lesbian, yeah. Ooh, another gay character, but they already have two. Why do they need another one? It seemed like, and I really appreciated that they were like, if we want it to be more than, if we want it to read to an audience as more than token representation, then we need to treat it as more than token representation. And I feel like for the most part, they did a pretty good job with that. I mean, obviously there were, when they initially killed off Culber, people got worried, like, oh God, come on. Like, are we really going to do this? But they kind of, made an adjustment there,
I think Discovery was kind of like really at the forefront of a lot. Like if we're talking about kind of more broad strokes of Discovery over the years, like I feel like Discovery was really the beginning of this streaming era of TV, like one of the first out of the gate, not just in Star Trek land, but in like just streaming in general, like
Hmm.
even before Star Wars was doing all of this, Marvel, like all the big franchises. It was one of
Oh,
the big
sure.
franchises
Of the
doing.
big franchises, I think you would have to say it was
Yeah, one of
the
the first.
first, or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
one of the first out there, and I think like it had a lot of growing pains to figure that stuff out because I think like yeah, the first season they did do the like they killed Culber, and that is like a very much spare your gaze line,
yeah,
and then they bring him back in second season. I think they justify it in a way that like makes it a worthwhile storyline with the trauma that Culber feels, but it's still playing into that trope, right? It's not escaping it. It's like even if we're subverting it, we're still doing it, and we're not letting queer people exist.
yeah,
And then in season 3 we do get Adira and Gray as trans and non-binary representation, and and they would just kind of naturally were for a lot of it, and I love that that was just like it's not even like subverting the tropes or going against it, just letting them be as characters, and then
yeah,
having the queer found family, which just feels like very natural. And this is something I always talk about with like queer representation, and again, I can't speak for other folks, but I'm sure like other marginalized communities feel somewhat similarly in some ways, where it's like I want queer characters to exist in shows and just be part of the natural fabric of it, but not have their queerness robbed of them. Because sometimes when
yeah,
people just have like, we'll have a black character in this, we'll have a queer character in this, and they just happen to be there and it's token, like the original series, like they're there, but their perspective as these marginalized communities are never communicated. And it's why I love like Cisco and Deep Space Nine, where it's like most of the time the fact that he's a black man isn't really that big a deal in the show, but when it becomes relevant, when he can be like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with how Vic
yeah,
Fontaine's Las Vegas world, it just erases the actual systemic racism and the real racism of the era, and he expresses that as a black man, like he that's his
yeah,
perspective. And the same thing I think for Discovery, where it was like these characters' queerness was never focused on or hyper focused on after like season 3 or 4, but it was always informed their perspective. So like Jet Reno talking about her wife at times, or the queer found
yeah,
family that feels very natural to Culber, Stamets, Adira, and Gray, and it never felt over focused on, but felt very queer in its perspective. And then when queerness did come up, um, I think it was like overtly it was addressed and talked about, like Adira
yeah.
finding themselves in their pronouns. And one other one too that I really like, and I'll stop ranting. Apologies, I rant too much, but
No,
it's
please go ahead.
one other one that I really love pointing out too is just a perspective that fit was in season 4. There's that wonderful episode where I wish they'd done more with Zora, but there's a great episode with Zora where they're debating Zora's personhood.
Hmm.
And it's Adira and Gray, the young queer people who are like, we see Zora as a person, and that feels like a queer perspective of like younger kids would recognize a different type of entity as a person before maybe adult people who have, like Stamets even having
Yeah,
a level of trauma regarding to it that he can't get past his prejudices up for even as a man of the future. And so it's just like oh, this queer perspective is represented even if it's not overtly stated as like queer.
yeah, yeah, and presumably they made sure that Adira would be busy in the
Yeah.
future
Yeah,
when
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 they said
when Burnham
Zora.
says, "Okay, Zora,
uh,
we've established
uh,
that you're basically a person, and we try to respect you as a person, and now you need to go to a far point in space and wait there for however many
I
thousand years for
hated
this
that
random
so
guy
much.
to show up."
Uh,
That was
what a
another one.
weird
That was
answer to that. Yeah.
Well, it's yeah, because I mean, like I said in my video, it's artless.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally artless, and I love Calypso. Like
Mm-hmm.
Calypso is one of my favorite things that this generation of Star Trek has produced. I think it's just fantastic, and I personally don't feel like there was any need to
Mm-hmm.
connect Discovery directly to Calypso, like either in a narrative sense or just in a critical sense. It's like, look, it's its own thing. Just let it be its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like even in a literal, and if you take a very literalist view of it, it's like, well, Calypso, it's never exactly clear when it takes place. It seems
Mm-hmm.
like it's a long ass time after
Mm-hmm.
anything else we've seen. So you could easily, even if Discovery didn't acknowledge it directly at all, you could easily, if you're that kind of fan and you need everything to connect, you could easily just say, well, Calypso happens a long time in the future and we don't know what happens to get to that point. Okay, that's all you need. But if they decide they want to, connect them, and the way they came up with it was Oh, Starfleet just tells Zora to go there
Yeah, and just
for some reason.
as a sentient entity who is clearly, as we see in Calypso, like lonely, and it's just like, wow,
Yes,
what we're weirdly abusive then of
it's
this. Yeah,
yeah. And it's like, and I think, like you mentioned in your review, like we don't know that anything in Calypso is remotely important enough
yeah.
to justify doing this. Like, it's just, I mean, it's a beautiful story, but it's not important to anybody but Zora and Kraft.
It's almost as if
Like,
like Kovich is like, all right, well, it's like Kovich is acting as like the canon police of like, well, I realize we need this to connect somehow, so I'm
yeah,
gonna send Burnham on a mission to be the canon cop.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, and they established that red directive thing where it's like, don't
Mhm.
ask any questions, just do as you're told.
Yeah,
We don't
it's
have
just
to explain why you're doing this. It's a red directive. Now just
yeah.
go.
I just now canon. It's like whenever you see Red Directive, it's just the canon cop. It's just the canon cop
Yeah.
coming in.
It's a red
We gotta make
directive.
sure canon. It's a Red Directive. We gotta make sure everything connects. It's fine.
Go park the ship in that nebula from Calypso and leave it there.
Yeah, and even what even more is frustrating too. This is a personal thing. This is not necessarily a critique of it, but like there's an answer in this season that I think would have been better for Calypso. Because what I love about Calypso is it's more this like kind of beautiful, poetic, liminal space story of like like both Zora in that episode and Kraft are kind of like we both have other things going on, but for this one moment we have this beautiful romance between Ship and Guy in this
Yeah.
liminal space wherever, and it just kind of has this very poetic feel to it.
Yeah.
And in earlier in the season during the time loop episode, you have the moment where they come onto the bridge and it's far in the future after like the brain had destroyed Federation HQ. And my interpretation, because Zora, it says at one point like, oh, is this another dream? And you see her playing music, and it felt very reminiscent of Calypso in that moment. And I there was a part of me, then I think other people thought of this too, is like, what if either what if Calypso was just a dream Zora in that version of the future just had of like, oh, I'm thinking of something beautiful for myself, is that liminal spacey kind of thing. Or Calypso happened in that alternate timeline just further into the future, and it was just like this liminal timeline that never was, sort of thing. And again, it's again, that's a me like that would have been a beautiful idea. It's a concept that I think would be cool, but I think like if they had wanted to, that would have been a fun, like kind of thematically resonant way to do it.
Well, and you know, the other thing with me is, and I've felt this, I felt this for Star Trek in the past. I felt this about Enterprise's last episode, and I also felt it about, and I've complained about this a million times, and people are probably tired of hearing me piss and moan about it, but the two-parter in Enterprise's last season where they feel the need to explain why the Klingons have different foreheads.
Yeah.
And my main beef with that is this is the end of the show. You know, like this is the last episode of Discovery, and like I said, I don't know exactly what the schedule was, but presumably all of that stuff with older Burnham and older Book was most of what they shot.
What they filmed,
you know, after they found out that it was going to be the end. So the Calypso tie-in, like they added that, you know, after the episode that they had mostly already finished, and I can't get past the fact of like, this is the end of your show. Like this is the this is the end of your show. This is the last thing that you're ever going to get to make for Discovery, and you're using it to tie in to a short that they made like 6 years ago. Like seriously, that's what
I even think the showrunner didn't even write. Like she said, I think they did the After Trek thing. She wasn't even involved in that. So
like that's what you're spending your final. And it's, you know, it reminds me of the Enterprise finale where it's like, let's do it as a TNG holodeck episode, and I'm like, this is the last episode, man.
Like, be your own thing. Say what you want to say.
This is your last episode. You're gonna do this.
Yeah, and I love it. It got me tearing up that moment where like it shows all of them being friends on the bridge, like that flashback.
It's it's a nice little like farewell to
But then it comes back, and this is something too. Is like that's what I love Discovery for. Like for all the criticisms that I have of Discovery, I love ending on these two notes. One I'm for Burnham, and one just generally like the two notes that I think thematically really resonate with me in the family of Burnham coming to this idea of I don't have to follow the mission anymore. Like I can find meaning in the people around me and my day to day. Because that's something that like you know, I always resonated with Burnham 4 is like she always is like everything is the most intense thing ever, and it kind of mirrors Discovery being like ever the world's always ending, and
Yeah.
so Burnham kind of being like she is always at this level of like the world's always ending, everything's the worst. I gotta carry the weight of the world on my shoulders as the main character of the show, but also like it was kind of her own sort of martyr syndrome to a degree that she had throughout the series, and the series kind of ending on this note of like you can let that go and you
Yeah.
can just, and it feels like there's this fun commentary on like the world ending stakes of Star Trek Discovery all the time where it's just like you can just be, you don't have to always be at this
Yeah.
level. I liked that beat, and I also liked the beat of like Discovery was about the friends we made along the way, for to use the cliche, but like
Sure.
it is this beautiful like the people that we made, that was what their meaning is, and I love those ideas. And you have this beautiful moment where she has this flashback to all her friends, but then it cuts back to this cold, empty bridge where she's by herself, sending this Zora off
Yeah.
to be on her own. And it runs at counterpoint to it because it's like this beautiful, like, rumination on connection and being in like with people. And then you end alone on the bridge, sending a ship out to be alone for forever.
It's
You know?
completely contrary. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's a really excellent point. It's like because yeah, I agree with you to the extent that there is a thematic thread that ties the whole show together. It is that
Mhm.
idea of the importance of empathy and the importance of connection
Mhm.
and valuing the people in your life. Right.
Mhm.
Like it's some Discovery doesn't, there are times when it feels like it wanders way far away from that,
Yeah.
but if there's anything in the show that ties it all together and
Mhm.
and is definitive for Discovery specifically, not just like generic sort of Star Trek, it's that it's
Mhm.
the feeling, like radical acceptance,
Yeah.
like loving the people in your life for who they are and accepting them and supporting them and receiving that same thing from them, and in Burnham's
Mhm.
case like learning to accept that and accept that you're worthy of that.
Yeah. I mean, that goes
I
like it.
wish, yeah,
Sorry, sorry. I mean, it goes throughout the whole season, the series. Like, it goes back to like, I don't know, I can like, I love that as a thematic thing where it just, if you go back to season 1, and that season was very much about like fascism and militarism and how those systems often like value people just for their function. Like, oh, fascism, like we need to traumatize you to be like a machine that just works in this militaristic like fight other people cog that Lorca had. And then the season, into season 3, you kind of talk about like how empathy changed people like Georgiou into someone who was
mhm,
this sort of dictator, into being a much more like, she's not fully there, but she has become a
yeah,
more empathetic person. And it's like that's like and the same thing with like the season 4 with the species 10Cs. Like they just said, oh, the species basically went like, we're Eljator beings from outside the universe. We can just mine this galaxy for whatever we want, right? And the point being like, oh, we need to have them see us as people and connect to them. And so it's
right.
like how we build empathy. So that's like, that is a running theme of the show, and I think that's, yeah, it does wander from that a lot of the time, but I think that's an overall thread that I love. So
And that's the part, and for me it's the part of the show that always worked.
mm-hmm.
When it lost me on everything else, I was
Mm-hmm.
I believe Burnham and Saru. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that they
Yes. Oh
love each
gosh,
other.
yeah,
I
yeah.
believe that they're friends. I believe Burnham and Book. Like I thought Book wound up being one of my favorite characters in the show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I thought Burnham and Book together were a really compelling story and a really compelling couple. And they had, and like, and again, it's like one of those frustrating things about the last episode where they had two shots to end with Burnham and Book and be really satisfying. Like I know that like Burnham and Book on the beach, I assume was going to be the original ending when they thought it was just going
Probably.
to be a season finale. I could have been happy just leaving it there.
Yeah.
Like that I
Honestly.
think that would have worked for a series finale. I mean, obviously they wouldn't have intended it to be that. Maybe they wanted more of like a capstone statement, but like Burnham and Book on the beach, coming
Yeah.
back together and saying, "Hey, let's do this for real and let's stick together no matter what." And I'll be with you and you be with me, and they sort of walk off together into the future. Like that's okay. There you go.
Yeah, and it ends right after them
Series
being
over.
at being at the
Yeah,
wedding with all of their friends, so it
yeah,
feels much more connected to like it. Yeah, you hearing you say that, it just makes me think like that coda, which does sort of like plot wise gives like a more like, here's the ending for the character. It's like, and as plot beat, it gives you that, but thematically it's just repetitious of that scene with them on the beach. Like it's saying the same thing. It's like Book and Burnham end up together, and life is made meaningful by the people that you choose to let into it. And
Yeah.
like every single scene after that beach scene is saying that over and over and over again, except for where it's like, and we're tying off Calypso, and but
Yeah.
it's just repetitious of it. So.
Yeah. I mean, they could have done something. And again, before I was when I saw that when they approached Discovery, and I saw that like the little bots were refurbishing the outer hull of the ship, I
Mm-hmm.
started to get a little sinking feeling, and I was like, oh man, they're not gonna, because like they
Yeah.
were taking the A off, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, and they're not gonna do this, are they? And because up until then I thought, and I kind of make fun of it in my video where I sort of lampshade like the false endings, but like, okay, ending on Burnham and Book, I thought would have been great.
Mm-hmm.
And ending on older Burnham and Book in their house, if you could have found some way to put a button on that and end with them there, that would have worked.
Mm-hmm.
Ending with Burnham and Book's son, like taking command of his own ship, I thought would have been a great way to end it, as long as it wasn't like
The Enterprise.
as long as it wasn't the Enterprise whatever, or like the Discovery B or something. Like we can have, there's more
Mm-hmm.
ships than, you know what I mean? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
the point of it's meaningful because he's becoming a captain, not because he's becoming the captain of a ship with a name we've heard before.
Mm-hmm.
They could have done that, but nope, we gotta tie up Calypso for some reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was frustrating, and I think there were a lot of things about the final season that frustrated me like that. Like going back to what you mentioned a little while ago about like having something that seemed like a solid concept, but they didn't really go anywhere with it. I felt that way about Maul and Locke.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I like the idea. I like where I think they're trying to go with this, where like because I mean they're basically the villains of the season. They're the
Yeah.
main antagonist. They're like the rivals on the quest. And I it's like I like the idea that they're not trying to dominate the galaxy. I like the
Yeah.
idea that they're not like all powerful despots who are trying to rule or destroy the Federation. They have very personal motivations for what they're doing. Like that part of it I think is really interesting. But it's like, do I believe for a second that they pose any threat to
Yeah.
Burnham
Yeah.
and the Discovery crew at all? No, not for a second.
Yeah. And
you
and
know?
and the ways they try to make them emotionally resonant, like with her having a tie to Book, like it has some
Yeah.
level of interest, but it doesn't end up really
Well,
going anywhere. Yeah.
again, like yeah, it's a good idea, and I was kind of hoping that would go somewhere because like I
Mm-hmm.
like Book and the idea of Book having a story that even though I really like Burnham and Book, the idea of giving Book a story that maybe wasn't just about him getting back together with Burnham,
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Book, especially like, Book lost his planet. He's kind of all by himself in terms of his family and his culture. And he sees this girl who he kind of sort of used to know, who's like
Mm-hmm.
family of his mentor, and he feels some connection to. It's like, okay, maybe there's something here. That could be an interesting story. Nope.
Yeah. Yep. 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 And the other one too, that if we're talking about antagonists, like the Breen too, another good
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah.
I actually liked that they brought the Breen in, and then it wasn't just like, hey, look, here's the Breen, we for an enemy from things that you know. They actually tried to do something with that and actually show like, what's under their helmets. And I actually really loved this idea of them having two different faces. That like they
Mhm.
have a goo face and a solid face,
The
and
goo
like
face. Yeah.
yeah, and their culture says like this face isn't your real face, and then it kind of that connects interestingly to them wearing masks of like, oh, they have to hide their face all the time, and so like it's very nebulous. That's my problem with it, is like there's a kernel of like that's a
Yeah.
cool culture, like what kind of culture says like that has biologically they have two different faces. I mean, as the trans person, I vibe with this very hard. Of like they have two different
Sure.
faces, but they say you have to be like the solid. That's the solid face is your real face, not your species fluid face, I guess.
Right.
And then you hide your face. And he was like, that's an interesting culture to me, and that's an interesting idea. And ultimately, it's not. They're just become like big faceless bad guys with a big ship that yell at the end, rather
Yeah.
than like there being anything meaningfully explored with that concept.
I think the thing I did like about, you know, mean aliens with a big ship that yell, though, is at least like there was that there, and it didn't last, unfortunately, but there was a little stretch in the episode where they're negotiating for custody of Maul and Locke. It's the episode where Locke dies eventually
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when they've been captured and they're on Discovery. And um, there were a couple of bits in that one where the Breen legitimately seemed threatening,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, oh, I could almost believe that these guys are like a serious threat to the heroes, and
Mm-hmm.
that even though intellectually the good guys are always going to win, but while you're actually watching the episode, like you could almost suspend your disbelief and think, oh, these guys might actually win,
Mm-hmm.
and if they get control of whatever this technology is, that might be bad news,
Mm-hmm.
and then but then it's like, oh no, for some reason Maul is in charge now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And even that,
All
and that
right.
doesn't really go anywhere either, and it's just
And
like,
then she's like
oh,
against the
okay.
Breen at the end too. Like she's fighting the Breen. Like,
Yeah.
wait, don't they work for you? Why are you killing them?
Yeah, like,
What's
wait
the
a
like?
minute, what was that? Are you in charge of them or not? Like, what was that whole scene at the end about? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's really, and then like the thing where uh her motivation becomes using the technology to bring Locke back to life, and then Burnham is talking to the progenitor at the end, and the progenitor's like, yeah, no, we don't do that. and and Burnham just kind of breaks the news to Maul, and Maul's just like,
Okay.
oh, and that's it. And it's like, okay, fine, another another
Yeah.
like potentially promising thread that just gets dropped.
Dropped. Yeah. It's like,
No, it's
nope,
like, we're
no.
not doing that. We're not doing that.
Don't
Yeah.
don't worry about it. It's like, oh, well, at least I tried. Yeah, good game.
Yeah.
Shake hands.
Yeah.
One positive I will say, because we didn't talk about him at all, we should, is I
Yeah.
do really like Rayner. Rayner
Oh,
was
Rayner
a
was great.
really good.
Yeah.
In fact, he made me retroactively, in no shade necessarily at the actor or anything like that, but like it made me go back and think like, oh man, he's a much better version of Shaw. I feel from Picard
They're
season 3,
similar. Yeah. They're similar. Yeah.
because my problem with Shaw, just to make the comparison, like I actually think Shaw was one of my favorite parts of Picard season 3. Personally,
Mhm.
I really liked his character being this like kind of a bigot, who he's a bigoted guy, a bigoted captain who has like, he very clearly in a trans metaphor, like dead name 7, does not see
Yeah.
her as a full person because of the Borg stuff. And you understand where that comes from. You learn his trauma and why it's sort of off-put onto, like, because the Wolf 359 thing, it's like off-put onto 7, and you
Mhm.
have this whole arc of him like overcoming his bigotry, and it's this like learning this overcoming this bigotry arc of this gruff guy. But then it's all undone for me in that final scene with him where like we learn that he had recommended 7 even before the whole season had started. And it's like, oh, so you're
Yeah.
saying this whole arc this season meant nothing because even before the season started, he realized like, I'm kind of a bigot. I guess I should probably like acknowledge
Yeah.
that, and like I think it just undoes that arc in a way that says
Yeah.
like, well, we can't have like we know you like this. It felt like a lot of the Terry Metalis or whatever writer like saying like, I like this character though. I don't want to make you feel bad about him in the end. So like he was
Yeah.
kind of always a good guy. What I liked with Rayner is like he did have that really good arc of being a gruff asshole who was a jerk, but he also was never he always like respected the people around him. Like he was a jerk and he would express his disagreement in appropriate places, like in private to the
Mhm.
captain. But he was on the bridge, he was always like, I'll follow Burnham when like this things go down. Like he would, like in the time loop episode, like he was having a disagreement with Burnham, but then when the time loop started happening, he's like, all right, what are we doing? What do you tell me to do? And I will follow it.
Right.
I'll express my
Right.
opinion, but I will follow what you say. And I like that as like a character type, because it shows like a mature character who's like, you see him being a jerk. We also learn about his trauma with the Breen,
Yeah.
and you see what informs it, but you also don't see him acting kind of childishly bigoted like Shaw was at certain points. So
Yeah.
I did really like it. And again, I like Shaw overall as like a storyline of like a bigot overcoming his essentially like transphobia, Borg phobia, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it does sort of undoes itself in a way that I think Rayner, earns better by the end.
Yeah, characters like Rayner, I think, are really important in show, especially if he's brought in as kind of a late addition to
Mm-hmm.
an established show where At least, I mean, the characters on Discovery that we get to know, we know. Like there's still, that's another one of my problems with the show overall, is it feels like there are characters on the show that we see a lot that we just don't know at all, even after 5 seasons.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for like, for Burnham and for Saru and for Stamets, and the characters that have been more or less established. Um, and for Rayner to be the guy who comes in, and he's not a bad guy. He's clearly one of the good guys, but he's also someone who has the attitude of like, you guys are full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like he doesn't express it unprofessionally. When he's on the bridge, he defers to the captain. He knows his place in the chain of command, and he respects that. But his attitude is, what the fuck are you people doing?
Yeah.
And whether you agree with that perspective as the viewer or not, I think it really helps in terms of drama to have a character like that,
Mm-hmm.
who's not a villain, but who is kind of off to the side and kind of giving the side eye to the other heroes. Like, what are you people doing? You
Yeah.
know, it creates not a little bit of a conflict, but just like a tense energy
Yeah.
that
Which
that
I
a show like Discovery, that especially like a very touchy feely, everybody loves each other show like Discovery can use from time to time. Where it's
yeah.
like, no, there's one person here who's like, don't hug me. I'm not here to hug anybody.
Yeah.
Like
But I but
you're
but I also
yeah.
sorry.
No,
No,
go
no,
ahead.
sorry. Well, I love how it felt like it was, again, it was, I don't think it was an intentional thing because it wasn't seen as the last season, but his character felt like a kind of meta commentary on the characters in Discovery, and also Discovery, the criticism wielded at Discovery, because he kind of has, like, again, the outraged merchants kind of like go, oh, Discovery's too emotional, right? And this is not how an actual military should function. Their ship would be just so dysfunctional. And what the show actually is arguing throughout it, this is that, Rayner comes from that more like, I am the boss,
Yeah.
and top down, like, I lead this thing. Whereas Burnham has a much more like, I get to know my crew. It's kind of like, it's not a flat power structure, but it is a little bit more egalitarian. Like, I listen
Yeah.
to everybody. Everyone has a voice here. And he sort of like comes to learn, like, oh, that is a way you can actually foster people too. And he does it with Adira and letting them like become their own person, and
Yeah,
showing them support.
which is a really
Mm-hmm.
nice moment, and you have that like little silent exchange between them where he gives her kind of a little bit of a smile, like, I told you could
Mm-hmm.
do it,
Exactly.
without going overboard. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I thought that was like a cool way to address that criticism. And also, if it's like a final season character, there's an element of him that echoes kind of Lorca, in not as super fascist as Lorca was, but like an element of
Right.
like this leader who is like, I see my crew as like, you are functions, you do the thing that I tell you to do, rather than seeing them as people, which is very much like Lorca's whole MO. And Rayner, it's not as far as Lorca does that,
Yeah.
but he does have elements of that. And it was a cool commentary to be like, oh, here's showing us like, they're like, Lorca couldn't be rehabilitated. He went full Magna at the end there,
Yeah.
make the Empire
Yeah.
great again. But like, other people can actually like grow, and we can show them that empathy is the way forward. Again, a very Discovery theme. And so
Yeah.
like I thought that he reflected both this as a final season, a overall theme, and just a cool character in his own right. So I just think it was a success all the way around. So
Yeah, I liked him a lot too. It always makes me chuckle when I hear people criticize. I've heard this about Discovery, and I've heard people criticize Strange New Worlds for it a little bit too, like that. Oh, the captain is too chummy with the crew. Like, I always love when someone criticizes a Star Trek show because the crew on the ship doesn't have proper military discipline, and
mm-hmm.
I'm like, first of all, it's a TV show about people in space.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, are you his boss? What the fuck do you care? Like, oh, the way Captain Pike talks to Ortega's, it's completely improper. Are you his boss?
Yeah.
What do you care? Oh,
And doesn't it
Burnham fraternizes with the crew too much or too emotional. Are you in charge? Are you the admiral who's in charge of? Are you Admiral Vance?
Yeah, would you need a
Like, why do
reprimand
you
for whatever?
care?
Yeah. And
Why do
also
you care?
it forgets too, like, wasn't Picard's whole character arc from, like, if you can give Picard a character arc, his arc is
Yeah,
like episode 1, he's like, I am the captain, I don't want to deal with these kids.
right.
Riker, it's your job to get to know the crew. I'm gonna distance myself, all the way until the last episode, where he's like, last episode of Next Generation, where he's like, I should have joined this poker game a long time ago. I should have been more
Yeah,
close. Like, that's his arc. That's the if you
and
give him
he
any
has,
arc, that's it.
and he regrets that he didn't do it sooner.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I'm not saying that he should have done it sooner. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the way they did it was great, and having that be like the
Yeah.
closing
It's a
moment of
good
the show
flaw.
is
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. But yeah, it's like, yeah, the way the way he started out doing it was not necessarily the right way.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
fact that he moved away from that over the course of the show is actually, we should think of that as a good thing.
Yeah, and like other
Yeah.
captains who maybe foster that from the beginning and have other flaws, like Burnham's flaw is not Picard's flaw, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah.
it's not to say like it's a negative that she does have this type of leadership structure that is different. From
Yeah,
Picard,
it's just the silly criticism. I mean, the other, I mean, there are so many things about Discovery that I feel like are completely valid to criticize. And yet when people, and then when you see people who like really don't like it, it's always, oh, they cry too much. Okay, you know, or we're there, or if, I mean, sometimes not spoken in this directly, but often it's clearly implied, like too many black people, too many queer people, you know. And I'm like, okay, like, you don't want to talk about the writing, the pacing, you know, the uneven narrative structure. You don't give a shit about any of that, do you? You just want to see white people shooting people with ray guns. Like, that's all you want to see. You know, no emotions, you know,
just kill. Yeah,
because God knows Captain Kirk was never emotional.
Never.
You know?
Oh God, no.
Never.
I mean, never. It wasn't like the whole point of that show is like being like, hey, Spock, maybe let emotions in a little bit more.
Well, God, how many excuses did they find on classic Star Trek for Spock to lose his shit? Like, he was always showing emotions. Like, they were always finding excuses for Spock to emote when he supposedly had no emotion. So when people complain about like, oh, the new Star Treks are everybody's so emotional, like, they did whole episodes that were just about Spock laughing or crying.
Yeah, there's a whole scene where Spock just goes in a room and cries for a while.
There's a whole scene. Yeah, it's just Spock crying by himself in a room.
This woke emotionality.
This woke Star Trek. It's like,
there's a video in me that I've wanted to do at one point where I kind of talk about this stuff, and I would have like interstitial things where it'd be like one of the outrage, like me cosplaying as like an outrage merchant, but I'm talking about the next generation or the original series. It's like, oh, look at this woke Star Trek with Spock crying. He's always doing emotional. They always find a way for him to be emotional. And like, look at this gay stuff with Kirk saying he has feelings for Spock. I don't know. And like, the black person on the bridge. I mean, sorry, not black person. This she's too competent. You know, she's able to like find that signal. We're finding that signal that quickly, just hyper competent. It's not because she's black. I just don't like she's a Mary Sue.
She's a Mary Sue. She's good at her job. That makes her a Mary Sue.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I mean, look, I thought Uhura was cool back in the 60s when she just pushed buttons and touched that thing in her ear, but this new version of Uhura who's like smart, I'm not a big fan of that. She's like solving problems and stuff on her own, and the captain's not even anywhere around. I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah, a counselor on the bridge, and you gotta have we gotta talk about our emotions on the bridge. It's just an excuse to put a woman next to the captain's chair. You know what it is. Like,
it's a great idea. It's like if like Twitter and YouTube existed in the 80s, all the things that these people would complain about.
Yeah, it would be they'd always find. It's why I call them outrage merchants, because like there are criticisms of the show, but it's and I think it's worthwhile. And sometimes even they express some of them because they use that to veil their other criticisms that are less than legitimate. And it's just they're peddling anger, and that's what it is. And this is something I'm getting more and more frustrated. We don't need to go down this road too much, but it's just something I'm getting more and more frustrated. Like, let's stop letting them dictate, because I feel a lot of like our responses to stuff is just like, oh, we're gonna respond to these people, be like, oh, you just hate, like, just let them whine in their corner. Like, let them fume. I'm tired. Like, we have so many more interesting ideas to talk about. Like, let them have their whiny fit in the corner about like, oh, women in video games don't have good jaw lines anymore. And we'll have actually adult
really serious questions, really serious issues, you know, that need to be addressed.
We need to discuss this.
I thought, I know that we've avoided mostly talking about Lower Decks. But I wanted to pitch you something, because you are a big Lower Decks fan. And I mean, it's it's too late now, and I don't think they would ever do this joke anyway, because I feel like this joke is too critical of Star Trek, and
Hmm.
Lower Decks isn't like it's too Lower Decks is very gentle in terms of actually making fun of Star Trek.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's just it's kind of like it has a very positive vibe towards Star Trek. It doesn't
yeah.
really
Of course, yeah.
none of the jokes are too close to
Too
the bone.
anything. Yeah.
But I always thought it would have been a hilarious Lower Decks gag where, and I haven't worked out the specifics of this. I don't know how you would figure this into a plot, but somehow you get the characters into a situation where there's a crisis that can only be solved by the participation of a gay person, and be and because the series is set like
And like a
in
yeah,
like
and
the
then
quasi sort of Berman era, nobody can find a gay person, and they know
that
that
would
gay
be
people
so
exist.
funny.
Like they know there must be gay people around. Like they know that they exist, but nobody knows one. Nobody can find one.
They find like a deny at one point. It's like you're non-binary. It's like, yeah, I'm more like a metaphor for being gay though. I'm not
Yeah.
really gay. Like on my planet, I'm technically cis, even though I'm
Yeah.
non-binary. It's like, God damn
I feel
it.
like it's too cutting of a joke. You know,
Yeah.
it's too it's
I think
but
they
I just
sometimes
yeah.
they sometimes did like I'll defend Lord. We can get into this fight. I
Go
think there's
ahead. Go
some
ahead.
that's fine. I think there's some element, and yes, I do agree. It is gentle. There's only so much you can break the toys from within the toy. Like you can't
Yeah.
break it too much because of the brand. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, but like there's things where like they have that one episode where they talk about the Hawaiian culture appropriation, which I do think is like somewhat of a like where Boimler's like,
A
oh
little
yeah,
bit.
I'm from
Yeah.
Hawaii, which I feel like
Yeah.
is a level of like talking about how like Risa or that like holodeck program on Voyager where Neelix is like dancing with the Hawaiian women, or even like Jadzia
Yeah.
like having the fire dancer,
The
like
fire
exoticized
dancer.
guy. It's
Yeah.
like there's been like the eroticization of Hawaiian culture is definitely a problem within some episodes of Star Trek, and I think that actually like called it out in a like in a way that like again I agree gentle. It's very gentle at it,
Yeah.
but it is there. I think so.
I think maybe the prevailing gentleness is maybe part of the reason why I love that sight gag of the giant Spock skeleton,
Yeah, I love that one too.
because it's so shockingly dark.
Mm,
And again, like the show, I'm not saying Lower Decks would necessarily be a better show if it was like constantly mean and grim and cynical all the time, but it almost never goes there. And that was in what, season 2, I think. It was relatively
yeah,
early
yeah.
in the run, and like I gasped when I saw that
Yeah,
in a
it's
good way. I was like,
yeah.
oh my god, I can't believe they did that. Like it's just it knocks, it's so funny, it knocked the wind out of me. I was like, I can't, and part of it was I can't believe they did that. I
Yeah.
can't believe this show, threw in just a throwaway sight gag. But if you know what that is the darkest joke this show has
It's
ever done.
really I love that. In fact, I have a I don't know if you know Aaron Harvey.
Oh
He's
yeah,
a
yeah.
yeah, he wrote the
He's Mr. Animated Series. Yeah,
yeah, he wrote that.
yeah.
He hates that joke. He was so upset at that joke.
Oh,
He's like, you
and see,
killed Spock too. No.
I love the animated series,
Oh yeah,
and I love Spock too. Like I love all of those like just completely bonkers things
yeah.
about Star Trek. Like I wish there were more of those. I wish the modern shows were a little more comfortable just throwing in something completely bonkers every once in a while.
Yeah.
That's why I like the fairy tale episode of Strange New Worlds. It was like, this is
Yeah,
just
it's just
nuts. Like
weird.
this
Yeah.
is just wacky, and it feels like, and the musical episode too. Like it just like
Yeah.
we're just gonna do something crazy. We're just gonna do something that is completely silly and and
Yeah.
not full of itself and not self-conscious. And I love
Now
that.
it's too serious. I actually really like it too,
Yeah.
and I wish they had more Star Trek do that. And going back a little bit to your point is like the gentleness. I do agree
Yeah.
though. Like I do think more Star Trek needs. And this is my problem with like a lot of franchises.
Yeah.
Like big franchises, they tend to be like, this is what Star Trek is, and it has to be like, this is the brand, so this is what Star Trek is. Whether it be like the writers thinking that, or sometimes the dictates of like the company or whatever. Within Picard season 3 being a big example, is like, oh, we're gonna do the next generation again, and it erases
Yeah.
some of the more interesting elements of that, like the interesting like splinter even though it was just Changelings 2.0, there was an element of it. Like I found the Changelings being like, oh, we have justifiable anger at Starfleet for the war crimes they did, was an interesting
Mhm.
idea that just gets tossed around to do. Let's do the Borg Queen again.
Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, it's like, let's do the Borg Queen again. Let's do the Enterprise D again. It's like we tossed this away, and I think more show. That's what made I think Deep Space Nine so good. Is
Yeah.
amongst numerous things, but like one of the big things about it was that it was willing to be critical of Star Trek and kind of tear down like this is what Star Trek has to be, but use that like let's tear down these the like the rules of Star Trek in terms of like the aesthetic and the things that say to ultimately kind of still uphold it a little bit to be like, look,
Yeah.
just because we're not the perfect people on the flagship of the Enterprise, like we're not like the top of the line Starfleet ship, we can and we're somewhat the outcast weirdos and you know queer people, whatever, queer being like the more like you're ostracized from the
Yeah.
center rather than being like queer in a sexuality sense. That even despite that, we still uphold these values, and sometimes even better than the Federation itself does. We uphold these values of caring about each other, infinite diversity, like finding friendship with each other. We find them
Yeah.
across our differences rather than homogenized, like everyone's a human on the Federation starship, other than like the few that we accept in.
Yeah.
And I think that more Star Trek shows should do that. And like Discovery, I think lost a little bit of that over the years. Like one of the things I love about season one, despite season one's flaws, I
Mhm.
think was its willingness to be like, hey, you see how this Klingon war has made Starfleet more militaristic. See how that kind of leads in a similar. It's not one for one, but it has a similar mindset to fascism in the mirror universe. We see like Lorca is
Yeah.
able to take advantage of the militarism of Starfleet because he's a fascist and knows how to use that, and that's a problem that like Starfleet and the Federation should address and be self-aware of. And that season was very critical of Star Trek and the auspices of like the brand and also the structures inside of Star Trek, like the Federation Starfleet itself. And I thought that was such a really cool critique that as Star Trek Discovery and then more Star Trek shows kind of went along, there's a little bit of elements that like I think uphold what Starfleet and Star Trek is too much to my taste, where it's like
Yeah.
it's a little bit too like, oh, this is what Star Trek is and we need to like celebrate that. And like, no, Star Trek to me is always about celebrating you being a weirdo dork and Starfleet being this thing that's like we will accept you and uplift who you are. And sometimes I think Star Trek in its more modern like seasons has become a little bit more like you should service Starfleet and Star Trek as the brand. Like it's
Yeah.
why I hate that song. And sorry, this is a rant. Last one I'll say.
No, go
It's
for
why
it.
I hate that. It's why I hate that song. I actually don't like the musical episode that much of not
Mhm.
not conceptually, but like the song at the end of that episode. It's like I think the lyrics go, "We know our purpose is to protect the mission," something along those
Oh yeah.
lines. And I
Yeah. Yeah.
dislike that where it's like, oh, your Starfleet is not about you protecting Starfleet or protecting the mission. It's about you being willing to explore your own self and Starfleet sort of being a vehicle to do that because we are going out to explore. But I also hated the whole like Ortega's like I fly the ship storyline where
Oh,
she
where
was
she's
just
trying to remember. She keeps repeating it
yeah,
over and over. Yeah.
because that storyline was like she wanted to go be on the away team, couldn't be. She wanted to do something outside, like she wanted to explore another aspect of who she was by being on the away team. And then the episode sort of takes pains to say like, but she should find identity in the thing that she does, and she never really should have like it doesn't say this overtly, but like kind of the overall idea is like you should be okay where you are though. And it's just like, well, no,
Yeah.
Starfleet. It should be like that lower decks thing of season 2 or season 1, episode 2, where it's like when I'm blanking it, Rutherford goes to different things. It's like,
Oh,
I
he's
want to be an
trying out
engineer.
different departments.
Yeah, I want to be
Yeah.
an engineer
Yeah.
now. And everyone's like, yeah, great, go for it. Awesome. I love it. Like that's the vibe I love from Star Trek more. And I
Yeah.
think that because we sometimes think too much of what Star Trek has to be, that kind of tends to override a few things in terms of the storytelling.
There was a thought I had again when I was watching Star Trek Beyond this morning. Um, there's a scene, not sort of late-ish in the movie when we're kind of heading toward the climax where they're all together on the Franklin, and Jayla is there, who was already on the planet and kind of became Scotty's sidekick,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she's the one who's been living in the Franklin, and she's used to being on her own, and they're coming up with this plan to go into Krall's prison camp and liberate the other crew members, and Jayla's really nervous about it because she escaped from the prison camp and she doesn't want to go back. And Scotty says to her, he trying to sort of encourage her, to help her find, the bravery to help them. He says, "Hey, you're part of a crew now."
Yeah.
And again, I had a thought as I was just like I thought, oh, thank God this wasn't the NX Enterprise. I thought, I'm so glad he said crew and he didn't say Starfleet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there are times when, and I'm not like anti Starfleet in Star Trek, and I'm not someone who
Yeah.
thinks like, well, I wish they would do a show that didn't, like, I'm perfectly fine with the franchise continuing to center on Starfleet. But there are times where sometimes it comes across like they're trying to make like a commercial for Starfleet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
plays like a promo for Starfleet, this fictional service. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like we can accept that like our heroes are part of Starfleet, and that maybe even Starfleet, like big picture, is mostly a good thing. But we don't it doesn't have to always come back to, these are Starfleet's principles, and Starfleet is the best organization in the world, and Starfleet is
Mm,
the embodiment of, all of our hopes and dreams. And it's like, no, it doesn't need to be that. It can just
yeah.
be it's the reason they're in space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
Because
reason they're in space.
I think we always need to realize, like, we tend to in society, like, venerate the institutions. Like, we should
Yeah.
like venerate, the institution of Starfleet, or venerate, if we make it more overtly like politically, venerate the Supreme Court or Congress or the presidential office, when in reality what it should be is these institutions should be here to facilitate people getting to live the lives the way they want to,
Mhm.
and protect it from, like, hurting others and things like that, but like facilitate people being their best selves, and not venerate the institution, venerate the ideals of that institution that should hopefully guide it towards facilitating people. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's where a lot of our issues come down to. It's like, oh, we respect the we respect the institution of the president more than like what the president should be there to do. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
same thing with Starfleet. So that got more political, but
For God's sake, don't get political.
politics in my Star
Oh,
Trek. Oh no.
oh. But yeah, it reminds me of like there's that line that Wesley has in season 1 of TNG. I think it's the one where he almost gets killed for walking on the grass when there's a "Don't walk on the
Oh
grass"
God,
sign.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And like which when the cops run up after
Mm.
he's been caught, and they say, did you walk on the grass, son? Tell the truth. And Wesley says his line is something like, "I don't lie. I'm in Starfleet." And I'm like,
Oh
okay.
God.
And it's like it's kind of acceptable from Wesley because he's like,
He's a kid.
super. He's
Yeah,
like wide-eyed at that point, and he's, oh,
totally.
I'm on the Enterprise with my mom, and the captain knew my dad, and blah blah blah. He's like, he's season 1 Wesley.
Yeah,
But it's like there's a lot of that from characters who you would think would know better,
yeah,
who would be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I believe in Starfleet. It's a good organization. I've had a good career, but like, let's not go crazy. Okay.
yeah.
Like let's
Calm
just
down.
pull it back a little, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
all right. So we've had a couple of questions in the chat over
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, of
last 90
course.
minutes.
Also, I
I'll
want to
cover. Yeah,
quick shout out
please.
to Kaylee. Kaylee gave a few super chats as well, and
Yes.
we were actually talking about before this stream, that I was at a Q&A. Sorry, long story short.
Yeah.
Before we
Yeah.
started the stream yesterday, I was at a live event, and Kaylee was actually the person that came up and said that she was a fan of both of us. So I was just like,
Oh,
hi,
cool.
Kaylee. Yeah, so nice to see
Awesome.
you.
And yes, and thank you for the super chats. Yeah, and well, there was one right before one of Kaylee's that says, "Do you think serial Star Trek is good, bad, or just okay?"
Hmm.
And that's I don't know. I'll let you say what you think, but I mean, to me, it's one of those things where it very much theoretically it very much depends on the execution. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
no reason why it couldn't work, but to date, in the instances that it has been attempted in Discovery and Picard specifically, I don't think it has ever quite
No.
worked, the
I
way that they wanted it to.
I think there are two ways to do serialized stories, and I don't think Discovery and Picard ever did them. And I think Prodigy actually does one of them, and Deep Space Nine I think does it as well,
Yeah.
and even Lower Decks to a degree at times. Which is one way to do it is like you come in from the get-go and know what your whole story is, because your whole story is telling something intentional. Like, I'm going to come in, I have a story that I want to say serialized, like I know what the season's going to say, and you kind of know A to B. like, you know, your whole storyline beginning to end. And so when you start off and your serialized story is like you're seeding the thematic and plot beats to make it feel satisfying when you get to the end. Um, and the other way to do it, which I think this is better for this season of Discovery, but
Mhm.
Prodigy I think nails it probably the best, which is have like a generalized, like we know like the different beats throughout the season, but then we can kind of slide in our little episodic moments here and there, and then there'll
Yeah.
be an episode that's like, here's the big plot beat. Of like, here's
Yeah.
the episode that is the plot beat, and then we'll just have a few more episodes that maybe we'll progress it a little bit, but it'll be like it'll be its own whole thing. Um, and I think those are the two ways that really work well. And the problem with Discovery and Picard is, and they've even said this, like I think Akiva Goldsman said this about writing Picard, is that the problem with that is they would start the season, and this is why they did the mystery box stuff, whereas like they'd start off the season, have no idea what the answer was going to be because they have to start writing the episodes and get going before they can finish the season because they'll start filming the episode. I think they like will start filming the show when they start writing episode like 5.
Right. So they don't
And
have
so
the
it's
whole season
yeah, so they're
written.
like, well,
Yeah.
we'll see little mysteries throughout, and then we'll answer them at the end. And that doesn't lead to necessarily, like, you can sometimes make that work, but more often than not, it just sort of feels like you're like, oh, well, we'll answer something later and hope it all works out. So I feel like that sort of is why they never fully worked, is because they kind of had this like in the middle thing where they would start off like seeding mysteries, but they never feel satisfying because they didn't know where they were ultimately going with them. So they would try to drop themes or ideas that wouldn't go anywhere or wouldn't pay off
Yeah.
as well or feel kind of rushed. And because the end of the seasons tend to then have to hyper focus on those answering those mysteries, you lose the episodic feel. So I feel like, again, Prodigy I think nailed it, where it was like, we know the overall beat for the season, but we have 20 episodes, and this set that story fits like 6 episodes, so we'll have
Right.
most of it be like little episodes along the way. Deep Space Nine did this too overall, though I think that was a little bit also more like winging it on the fly, but they had more time to deal with it too. So
Yeah. I mean, I feel exactly the same way. And another thing that Prodigy did really well, because it does have the relatively long season,
mm-hmm.
in terms of episode count, because nowadays 10 to 13 episodes is pretty much the standard season, and Prodigy's first and I believe second season about to come out as well as 20 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So they were able to they had sort of a long-term story arc that runs through all 20 episodes, that starts in episode 1 and gets paid off in episode 20. And they also had smaller arcs, like there's a payoff in episode 10,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that feels conclusive,
Yeah,
but that also spins things forward, you know, and pushes
in a
you
new
into the
way.
second back of the season. Yeah. And you know, there's no reason, even and I see someone in the chat said another way to deal with it is to have more episodes. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that's a really popular sentiment, but I really don't think the number of episodes is the problem. I mean, Disco had 10 episodes for its final season. Picard had 10 episodes for all 3 of its seasons. There's no reason why you couldn't do the kind of story structure you just described in
Mm-hmm.
10 episodes.
I think you definitely can. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you of course you could. I mean, and the thing, like Strange New Worlds does it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, Strange New Worlds, that where the episodes themselves are standalone, but there are character arcs that cross, you know, through the entire season, and little plot things, you know, like the number one being secretly genetically engineered, that kind of ran through
Mm-hmm.
the first season, and also like Pike's sort of dealing with his trauma
Yeah.
of glimpsing his future, that kind of came up repeatedly throughout the season, and wasn't really a focal point until the end. And you know, in season 2, the little hints about the Gorn doing stuff
Yeah.
off camera, and then it doesn't come into play until the very end. Like, you know, Strange New Worlds does a good job with that, where it's the episodes themselves are standalone stories with a beginning and a middle and an end, but there's stuff in them that pays off later. And that's 10 episodes. Like, you don't need if somebody wants to give a production company money to do a 24 episode Star Trek season, and they have 24 good scripts for good episodes, absolutely do it. Like, I have no problem with it. But there's no reason why you can't do a 10 or a 13 or a 15 episode season and have it be good. You know,
Yeah.
like the number of episodes is not is not as important to me as to a lot of people. Like you could, depending on how you tell the story, you could find plenty of time to do those little, what we used to call the filler episodes. Like there's no reason why you couldn't do those in 10
I agree.
episodes.
I think you're right. I think like I think Strange New Worlds kind of nailed it. Like my problem with Doctor Who this year, just to sidetrack a little bit, is like they've had this season's had 8 episodes, and almost every episode's been a banger of this season. Like it's been great, but they've been like heavy concept episodes, and it hasn't been just like a one where it's just like, let's just chill with the Doctor for a little bit, you know, and just have fun. And they're just like very high concept. Like this episode's about racism. This episode's about like a queer allegory, and it's like less like fun, like just whatever chill episodes. And I love those like big episodes. Like these are about this thing. I love those things, but I also like the mix of like, let me just have fun with the characters. I think Strange New World's kind of, you know, I have other critiques of that show, but I think structurally, like it's like, here's a big episode that's like, this is about like just like legalized you know, systemic racism with the Una episode. Like this is a big episode, and then we have an episode where like you know, Spock has like a comedy of errors because he can feel emotion, sort of thing. Like it plays with both of that. So
those are and I've said before, like I don't know what their plans are for the future. I sincerely hope that as long as Strange New Worlds is on, however many seasons they get, every season has one wacky Spock episode.
Yeah, I am here for the wacky Spock episode.
The first 2 seasons each had a wacky Spock episode. They were both awesome. And they're both like nice, like you were saying, it's just like a change of pace episode where it's like, no matter how heavy other stuff going on is, it's like, here's a little farce about Spock and his girlfriend or his family or whatever it is. It's like, oh, isn't this nice? You know, it's clever and fun and reminds you of, again, like the goofy side of Star Trek that sometimes we get too far away from, for my taste. And it's just, I sincerely hope we get at least one wacky Spock episode every year for as long as they get to do Strange New Worlds.
Agreed.
Couple other questions coming. Actually, since we started answering questions, people have been giving me more money, so this is great. No, so Sean Piper wanted to know. Actually, there's another one from earlier I wanted to get to first. Sorry, Sean, I'll get to you in a second. This from Kaylee O'Hara. With the Easter eggs, would you say they're trying to create the triumph of the Echo over the Voice? A little Nemesis reference there.
Everyone's favorite, you know.
The
Echo over the Voice.
The Echo.
Started off Tom Hardy's career right there. You know?
Who could have guessed that he would grow from that tiny seedling into the fantastic actor that he has become?
Yeah, if we didn't have Nemesis, we wouldn't have had Venom 2, you know?
Exactly. Trace the arc of this man's career. I've got a parasite. I love that line from the first one. He's like, anyway,
they're not good movies, but they're fun.
They're such fun. Yeah, they're such fun. Not a Band Account asks, how would Admiral Burnham defeat modern fascism?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, well, she would already know how it turned out because she's from the future. So she would already know what mistakes we made. So she would just come back and do something else.
Yeah, you know, she'd send Trump into the spore drive.
She would do what they did to the Breen in the last episode. They jump into the edge of the galaxy and be like,
they're not gonna kill him, but you know, they'll take their time to get back. They'll learn their lessons.
They'll have some time to think about what they did.
All right, everybody, we're at the Great Barrier. It's a big barrier, not as good as my barrier, but it's a good barrier.
I saw the biggest, most beautiful barrier.
Build the wall. We need to build the wall at the Great Barrier, everybody. Keep out species to whatever that number is. I don't remember.
A Breen came up to me, said, "Mr. Trump, I think your barrier would have been bigger." I said, "I know, I think it would have been too." This big Breen, tears in his eyes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He said, "Mr. Trump, I wish you were the leader of the Breen Imperium." I said, "Well, maybe I should be."
Maybe I should be, as you.
Yeah.
Sean, this small lady, I said, lock her up.
I told her if I get elected leader of the Breen Imperium, Maul will be in prison. Okay.
There's good.
The way she treated the Breen was terrible. It was terrible the way she treated the Breen. It was terrible.
Sorry, I
Um,
might die a little
Sean,
bit there. That was funny.
Sean Piper says, "What do you both hope to see from Strange New World season 3?" I want to see yet another form of the Gorn that looks nothing like the other versions we've seen.
Just keep his. Okay. I have a friend who gets so angry about the Gordon depiction, like because
Yeah,
like they're not a haploid life speed because the way they depict is I forget. I'm not a xenobiologist by any
yeah,
means, so
no,
I'm gonna BS this. But there's something about like the way the Gordon are depicted in Strange New Worlds is they are like they lay eggs inside people and then they grow into the like the like mini Gorn and then become the big
yeah,
Gorn later on.
that's
And
the idea.
like
Yeah,
her anger is like technically you cannot have a species that would become sentient like that because they would if they literally grew that fast they would burn out too quickly and they don't have enough energy. So she gets so angry about that
I
every
love when
single
people
time.
get hung up on science in
Yeah, it's
Star
just
Trek.
in Star Trek, it's just hilarious. But yeah, my hope is that they, if when we come back to the Gorn, I've had critiques of the Gorn, but I hope
Yeah,
what they do with it is that they make the story of the Gorn be about like this idea of because they are so non-human, we have dehumanized them and sort of see them as monsters because there's little hints of
yeah.
that with like Pike being like they're just monsters, and I hope that that's brought
It,
home and
yeah.
addressed.
I,
Yeah.
I know. I have one. A buddy of mine who is also a patron of mine. David Colby is not a Strange New Worlds fan at all,
Mm, mm,
and that's one of the disagreements we have because we see Star Trek very along very similar lines, but we just have this big disagreement over Strange New Worlds,
mm,
and that's one of his problems is he really doesn't like the depiction of the Gorn as just like monsters, you know,
mm.
but I feel like you just said like it seems like
They're
they're
angling
heading
towards that.
yeah they're going somewhere with it, and also like and I mean this is I usually don't make these kinds of arguments because it's a very canon based argument, but like we know how it turns out, like Captain
They
Kirk
mhm,
realizes their humanity and refuses to kill one in Arena
mhm.
in the TOS
It's
episode.
like, oh, they're
So
actually people. Yeah. Huh.
yeah, so like even if strange, but I think Strange New Worlds is going to get there as well, at least
And there's enough little
to a
one-off
point.
lines. There's little one-off
Yeah,
lines. Like you have characters who have bigotries, which is never shown to be a good thing.
yeah,
Like Lon, or yeah, Lon has some bigotries toward the Gorn, and again, understandably based in some form of trauma, from them. But like, it's not going to be a good thing. And then Pike has those "they're just monsters" line, and so I think that they're angling that way. But I hope that that's what we get. And then also just my other hope for is just like fun one off, like again, just like I like the structure of the Strange World. I think it
yeah.
has a really nailed on
I
structure.
yeah, I want a wacky Spock episode.
Mm-hmm.
I would I would I mean this is another thing, like I know some people I mean who like the show but are like where's the Ortegas episode, you
Yeah.
know? And I Ortegas is maybe other than like Pike, Ortegas might be my favorite character in the show. Like I love Ortegas. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm completely fine with her
Being just,
in the role she's
yeah,
in. Like just
yeah.
like I mean, if they have a script for a great Ortega Centers episode, like oh fuck yes, I'm there for it. But I don't feel like I need it. Like I feel like I know her. Like one of the things I love about Strange New Worlds, especially compared to the way some characters on Discovery were treated, is like I feel like I know Ortegas better than I know Awoshikun, even
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I
though
agree. Yeah, we've had
Awoshikun
less
has
time.
been in way more episodes, you know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean even and I feel like I know her even more than Detmer, and they gave Detmer a little bit of a story in like season 3 with her kind of PTSD over crashing the ship. Like they tried to give
Which I
Detmer a
liked.
little
Yeah.
bit. Oh, so did I, but it
Mm-hmm.
was like I still there's a weird kind of remoteness to some of the Discovery characters that I just don't think they ever got past. And it's like within a couple of scenes in Strange New World, just like, oh, okay, I know who Ortegas is. I know who Nurse Chapel is. Like I know who Umbenga is. Like I feel like I just you get a sense of their personalities and who they are, even if you don't know anything about their backstory and where they grew up and did they break
Mm-hmm.
their leg when they were 10 years old, and like you don't know any of that, but you get a sense of who they are from the way they're written and the way the actors portray them in the scenes. So I'm completely, but I mean, more Ortegas is fine with me, but if it's just more of Ortegas flying the ship and being a badass and quipping back and forth with Pike, I'm fine with that too,
I like
because
that.
I
I
think she's
agree. Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. My
Yeah,
two if I address two critiques of it, or not even critique,
yeah,
well, one critique and one thing that I hope for season 3 is
yeah.
I love the depiction of Nurse Chapel in Strange Worlds. Like like
Me too.
seriously, she is probably my favorite character. I adore her portrayal so much.
Me too.
Um, but my big critique of her, especially in season 2, is a lot of her stories tend to focus on Spock and like it's centering
Hmm.
around Spock, and a lot of it feels like it's trying to justify um what we see in the original series, which is her lusting after Spock
Right.
in the season. Like her big song and in the whole season is like her saying about like going away for Spock, and and we even learn at the end of the season she's going away to be with the guy who eventually becomes her fiance, the guy who makes the
Right.
sex dolls in
The sex robot guy. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so and like, well, I don't hate those. I think those storylines were decently handled. I hope she gets a bit more too in the other season to like get away from just having to be centered on like canon justifying and
Yeah,
Spock storylines, and get to be herself. And she got a little bit in season 2 with like the PTSD storyline a little bit, but I do hope we get a little bit more of her getting to be beyond that. And then
yeah.
also, I hope we get to see more of Captain Angel because I loved Captain
Oh
Angel.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was a terrific episode.
I
Yeah,
love that was one of my favorites in that, and
yeah.
I don't even necessarily like as I loved the Cybok call out in that season. I was like, I know it's a canon thing, but it's like I love that you're like, you know what, that weird guy from the worst movie. Let's just have fun with him and give him a non-binary pirate girlfriend or
Yeah,
partner, I should say. Excuse me.
partner. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so I love that for him, and I would love to see more of him. But even if we
yeah.
don't get to see more of Cybok, I would love to see more of Captain Angel, like my
I
non-binary
agree.
captain, the pirate captain. I love them. So
I agree. That is something that they haven't really established in Strange New Worlds yet, which is they haven't given Pike a strong recurring adversary.
yeah, yeah,
You
like
know, like
Gul Dukat of the series,
Gul.
sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Well, yeah, because like Picard had Q, Cisco had
Mhm.
Gul Dukat, Janeway
Janeway
had the
kind of had the Borg Queen,
kind of had the
kind of.
Borg Queen, which never really worked for me because that's Picard's. But it's like you
Mm.
can have it, Janeway. Oh, thanks. Give me
Yeah.
Picard's hand me downs. But and yeah, I mean, like Archer had Shran. They had kind of their frenemy thing going on, and
Mhm.
like, and I just it would be cool if Pike got one. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. Captain Angel's a
and
good would be a great one for that. I
Captain
think you could
Angel. Well,
slot
yeah,
them
that
into that.
there's
Yeah.
yeah, I think that might work because
Hmm.
they're an interesting character in their own right.
Hmm.
You know enough about Angel that it's not a case of 100% evil. Like there
Hmm.
are understandable motivations there, and there's the potential for like a fleshed out character, but who would still be opposed to the good guys, and
Hmm.
if push came to shove, you would still be rooting for Pike.
Hmm.
And I yeah, I that there might be potential for that. Um, but yeah, I mean, just more basically more of the same that we've
Yeah,
gotten
yeah, yeah,
from it.
yeah,
I mean, it's been a good show so far.
yeah.
Um, Someone said, Dean the Machine, not really a question, just more of a comment, says Andor had it right with 12 episodes with a through thread and 4 3-episode arcs with payoffs.
Yeah.
I'm not as big a fan of Andor as a lot of people
Yeah.
are, but I did use Andor as an example in a video I made of how to structure a
A
season
show.
long story. And I do think,
Mm.
even though it didn't entirely work for me, the idea of, instead of trying to do a 2-hour movie in 12 hours,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
breaking it
yeah.
up and
Do
having
like 4 or
smaller
3.
stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for like
Yeah.
because essentially, if you break those out, they are basically kind of movies in themselves with like some through lines throughout, but they
Yeah.
kind of work as their own. Like here's the beginning, Act 1, Act 2, and then the third one's the big climax. So yeah.
Yeah. The general idea is I think is much easier to pull off than
Hmm.
let's try to sustain this one thing for 13 episodes and hope
Yeah.
everybody loves the payoff when we finally get to
Hmm.
it.
I agree. I think that's a really smart way to structure the season. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hand of Omega says, and you are a little more qualified to answer this than me because you have seen more Doctor Who than I have. But
Hmm.
the question is, which Doctor Who, or I guess which version of the Doctor, would you most like to see crossover with which Star Trek crew? So of the current era of Doctor Who, I've only seen up to about midway through the Matt Smith
Hmm.
era. So I haven't gotten to Capaldi or
Jodie or
J-
Shruti
J-
Gatwa
yeah,
or
Joe,
David
yeah,
Tennant again.
David Tennant again, yeah. But yeah, so I only basically have the first three of the new era to kind of pick from. I haven't seen the. I mean, of the ones I've seen so far, I like Tenet, and I think Tenet
Hmm.
would be probably would probably fit the best in the Star Trek sort of aesthetic.
Hmm.
His era of the show seems probably the most Star Trekish to me. If you
Yeah.
have to make the comparison, which I don't think you necessarily do, but so I would go with 10 with Tenet, but I don't know what you think.
I would actually agree. And actually, I don't know if since you haven't watched the new season, there's in one of the episodes of the season, I think a character, one of the companions like, oh, says, oh, they go down a sci-fi ship, and even the people on the sci-fi ship kind of have Star Trek kind of uniforms, like the
Oh
color
yeah.
coded uniforms. And the character's like, oh, this is like Star Trek. And then the doctor basically goes, oh yeah, we should go and visit them sometime. And then
That's great.
Russell T Davies, the showrunner, basically even said too, like, I would love to do a Star Trek crossover. Like he even called it out. So hopefully.
That would be great.
But yeah, I mean David Tennant's my favorite Doctor, so I would be down with him. And I think if like a crew that he would be good for, like Tennant's Doctor always had this like self-seriousness, like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders sometimes vibe to
Mhm.
him. So I think he would actually be fun with the Strange New Worlds crew, who could be like kind of
Yeah.
like, hey, shake it off a little bit, like take it, like be just a guy. And like could even fit with like a good Pike story too. With like Pike sometimes also feels like he has the weight of the world on him too, and you could kind of like have those
That's true.
characters. Yeah,
And Pike and the Doctor, like, there's like that sort of like just below the surface torment,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
where like the doctor is usually like when interacting with people, the doctor is usually kind of funny and kind of, a little bit larger than life.
Hmm.
But then every once in a while you get the glimpse like behind the mask and you see like the weight that he carries, for all of the things that
Hmm.
he's seen and done. And Pike is a little bit the same way with his the accident waiting for him in his future. It's like, oh, he's mostly a really cool, low
Hmm.
key kind of awesome guy, but every once in a while he gets super depressed.
Yeah, and that would even be
you know
fun too. Is like you'd even do something. Sorry, now I'm just pitching an episode where just like you're just like
Yeah.
where like David Tennant even says like I'm because there's the whole beat within Tennant's run of like oh, I can change time. I'm in this arrogant. He had this arrogance of like I can change even established bits of history because I know
Yeah.
better. You could have it be like, oh, he could be Pike. We could take it, fix your chair, your BP chair future, and maybe have it be like Pike's like, no, you like this my destiny. That would be
Yeah.
like an interesting sort of cool
That would
conflict.
be, yeah. Because Pike could be like, I've already tried that, man.
It's a bad idea, you know?
It's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Trust me. Do you like Spock? It doesn't
We
go
all
well
like
for him.
Spock, you know, yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't go well for him if I try to change this, okay?
Mhm. So yeah, I think that
Oh,
that would the two
yeah.
of them would be cool. An
Yeah, there's
interesting
there's
series.
potential there, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I know you've read some of the IDW comics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have always been a fan of the Star Trek Green Lantern crossover that they did
Oh, those are
about
fun. Yeah.
7 or 8 years ago, because they're just so bonkers.
Goofy. Yeah. Just
Yeah, they're
really
just
weird.
so goofy. Like my favorite little detail in them is the setup for it is the Green Lanterns escape from like they escape the destruction of their universe and they
And they're
wind
just
up in the Star Trek universe. And it's like I remember reading it for the first time and I was like, halfway through it or something, and I thought, boy, these guys got over the death of their universe really
It's
quick.
fine. It's no big deal. What are you
like,
talking about? Yeah.
like I know you get caught up in the adventure and stuff, and like, okay, oh look, it's the Enterprise, and we're doing Star Trek stuff now. But it's like, yeah, you're literally the only people from your entire universe who survived.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
and
it's fine.
you're just kind of over it. Like, yeah, it sucked. Here we are.
My favorite thing with that is this is just a canon nonsense thing that I really love.
Yeah.
But technically, at the end of the second comic, the Green Lanterns are there still in this universe, in the
Yes.
Kelvin universe,
Yes.
and I think some of them even join the crew, and that takes place between Into Darkness and Beyond. So
Yeah.
theoretically, in Beyond, you just never see. I just like to think you just never see them. but there are some Green Lanterns just chilling on the ship somewhere, and they're like, "Oh, I guess the ship's getting blown to pieces." Oh well, Kirk's got it.
They can take care of this themselves.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
I don't need to use my power ring to do anything. It's fine. Yeah, I'm the same way. I love sort of, you know, that's why my sort of personal philosophy is, I mean, pretty much everything is canon.
Yeah.
Like people who get uptight about like, well, this and that, like as much as I am not generally a fan of the show, like I do think it's really silly that there are some people who are like, is Lower Decks canon? Well, why wouldn't it be? Like what is, you know, like, are you that uptight about Star Trek?
And my argument also too is like when people says, well, Discovery's not canon, I'm like, sure. Who like you as a fan do not need to care about canon. Whatever you want to be canon is whatever you want to be canon. So like there's these fans being like, oh yes, Discovery, technically there's a Prime universe and there's actually the Discovery universe, which is different from the Prime universe. And you see it's and they get out like the conspiracy boards of like, here's how it all works.
I love like the thought that for some reason the producers are trying to hide from the audience what made up universe the show is in. Like it's so ridiculous.
And I'm just like, if you want, and they do it sometimes in like my comments as like a gotcha, is like, well, Discovery is not really canon to the original series. And I'm like, I mean, if that's what you want to believe, like, okay, sure, cool, good for you. Like, if that makes it work for you, if it makes it work for you that Discovery is its own completely different universe from the rest, and that's how you make it make sense, and it makes you like the show better, cool, that's great. The only people that need to care about what actually is canon is the writer of that particular episode, and they get to pick and choose what they want to consider to have like been canon to their story. That's the only person that needs to give a crap. Other than that, anyone else is whatever you want it to be. So
it's one of those complaints that is so peculiar to these kinds of fandoms that like when you apply it to anything else, to me, it reveals how silly it is. Like imagine someone saying like, well, I like Law and Order, but you know, Criminal Intent, that's not canon. Like, what are you talking about? Okay, Law and Order. Yeah. But like, are the Law and Order homicide crossovers, are they canon?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It's like CSI New York, I don't consider canon.
Yeah, exactly.
But CSI Cyber is canon to CSI Miami and CSI Las Vegas. But I do consider that one episode of CSI New York actually is canon with Miami because it makes this episode make more sense, you see. Yeah. But the rest of it, no.
I like General Hospital, but Port Charles is not canon to me. Like, okay. Sure. It's like it seems it's such a silly thing to complain about. It's like just watch like the show if you like it, don't like the show if you don't like it. But like getting all tied up in knots about like you know, but is Lower Decks, is it canon? I don't know. Who gives a shit? Do you like it? Is it a good show or a bad show? Yeah. Like, what else, man? What else is important? You know, like that's why I never cared about like, because it's mostly been like the Star Trek animated series I feel like has mostly been acknowledged as canon at this point, but like there was that weird era, you know, like sort of in the 90s, where Gene Roddenberry was like, that's not canon, and I just always found that incredibly silly because it's just like, well, okay, I mean, it's there, like I can watch it.
like who doesn't matter? Yeah,
does it not? I mean, none of this happened anyway.
Again, it's like my only argument is like the only person that needs to care is the person writing the story at the time, because they get to make it choose. Like if they want their emotional stakes to feel real, it's like they'd be like, okay, this episode happened in this character's past, and so like that's what I want to build upon for the character's emotion or something, or like we're pulling something from that. Like that's all that matters. And then in the very next episode, if another writer wants to be like, and that didn't actually happen, but because it makes my story better at the time, I'm fine with that too. So it's it's fun.
Yeah, I'm the same way. A couple more super chats real quick, and then I'll let you go because we've been going for over 2 hours.
I was like, I need to pee real bad.
Just go, and nobody's gonna notice. Just go.
Yeah, it's fine.
Just let it rip. John Dorsey with a super chat says, a live podcast with 2 of the best Trek analysts on the interwebs. Take my money. As a bonus, you both have raised my social awareness. Thanks. Oh, well, thank you, John. Whatever small role I played in that. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Stephen G. Clenard, who's one of my regular troublemakers, says 2-part ep to explain arena style Gorn with Phlox.
I'm here for it. Just get him back in. He's like, all right, Fox, you need to make the Gorn look like the rubber suit monster.
Yeah, exactly.
And Fox like, not again. He looks at the camera and goes, not again.
He does like a total, just like an office take to the camera, like,
He's like,
okay. Yeah. And here's one from Jeff Nicholas who says, I hate these questions. No offense, Jeff. Thanks for the money, but I hate these questions. Dream team crew: captain, first officer, engineer, doctor, and tactical.
Oof, 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 oof.
Everybody on Strange New Worlds. There.
I would just go everyone on Deep Space Nine.
Everybody on Deep Space. Yeah, just exactly. Oh, those kids on Prodigy. I like every single one of them in the position that they're in. Yeah. I'll go with that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it would just be like, it would be Deep Space Nine. There you go.
Deep Space Nine. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one because everybody's so good at what they do.
Yeah.
Even Worf, even Worf, when they figure out what his job is.
Whatever he does, get angry at Odo.
Give him the ship. He can fly the ship.
Yeah, he's just whatever drama he wants with Odo. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one last time, June 25th, Identities on Nebula.
Sign up at identities.tv/IDENTITEAZE. You can remember it because it has the word tit in the middle. So.
Identities.
Exactly. Identities. There you go.
And it is linked in the description of this live stream as well. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, I'm excited. So. Yeah, I'm hopeful that everyone. Well, it's one of those like I just hope people enjoy it and have fun with it. Like it's you work on it very hard for a long time, and then you birth it in the world, and you're like, it's not mine anymore. So hopefully you like it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for coming around and doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's been a while since we've done this.
Yeah. I'll just be, even though you have horrible opinions on Lower Decks, I'll always show up and chat with you, Steve.
and low key judge me for it while we have our friendly banter. And high key too. Yeah. All right. Thank you for being with me, Jesse. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you later.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Talk to you later. Bye, everyone. I don't know what I'm doing. There we go. That's it.
There you go.